of the Money Bills Act, right? We are expected to interact with the public when we deal with the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, so that we can get their views. So as I said, today we're having COSATU, who will start, as that's how we do it. Let me just again recognize your presence, COSATU and PPO. There's also honorable members from the provinces, finance committees who have joined us today and have been with us for the past 3 days. You are welcome, honorable members. Members of the public who are joining us, members of the media, you are all welcome. I guess you all have an agenda in front of you, and I'll just check with the secretaries. Do we have any apologies?
Babalo? Chairperson.
Darren?
Chairperson,
Yes.
from Standing Committee on Appropriations, I have apologies from Ms. Ntlangwini and Mr. Mlenzana.
Yes.
Apologies.
Yeah, there's also an apology from Honorable Matafa. Honorable Matafa and Honorable Mlenzana, they are part of the Standing Committee on
Appropriations,
Auditor General, so they are meeting as we are also meeting. Babalo, yeah, there's also
thank you, Chairperson. From the Select Committee on Appropriations, Chairperson, I've got 2 apologies. Chair, Honorable Mahlangu will join us a little bit late, and also Honorable Mama Rahane, she will leave the meeting just after 11 o'clock, but she's part of the meeting right now, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much.
Chairperson, I've got 2 apologies.
I'd also like to recognize the presence of the support staff from both committees.
She will meeting just
COSATU Matthew,
11 o'clock.
I saw you.
The meeting right now,
allow COSATU to go in for the first 30 minutes, and then after that, we'll engage with COSATU. I think that's what we are proposing today. Matthew, I'm there.
Yes, I'm here, Comrade Chair. Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. I just want to check after that, because what we've been doing is that we've been having presentations. I think there's a presentation, and then we're having a presentation by PPO. Are you rushing anywhere with us until 12?
I'm just, yes, your flexibility, Chair, whichever makes sense for members. I'm flexible.
I think let's have you until 12 o'clock. Allow you to make your presentation, and then allow PPO to make their presentation. I think I want to do it that way, and then allow honorable members to engage with both presentations. So we are welcome for the first one to start.
I'm just, yes, your flexibility, Chair, whichever makes sense for
I've got 30 minutes there. I'm typing, let's have you until that way, and then allow honorable members.
No, thanks very much, Chair. Chair, I think, good morning to members. I think Lubabalo will be assisting with the presentation to share it on the screen. I'll be very scared if I try to do that myself. Last time I tried it, I collapsed my computer. But I can start along, and then I think Lubabalo can just try to share the screen with there it is. Okay. So, Luna, good morning, Chair, and good morning to members. Our presentation might look a little bit long, but I'll try to just focus on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill issues. Other stuff towards the end is just more other budgetary issues, but I won't go into those too much, but just for members' benefit, etc. So I think, Chairman, we all know the kind of economic challenges we were facing before the lockdown. We know the issues of 40% and rising unemployment, the dangerous levels of inequality and poverty. But I think, Chair, also keen to us was not just the collapse of many SOEs, but also many municipalities themselves were in varying stages of collapse. We had about 29 municipalities.
Chairperson?
Yes.
Dennis Joseph here. I'm not able to hear Matthew so clearly. I'm not sure what the problem is. Dennis Joseph. I'm not sure if the other members have the same problem, but I can't hear Matthew speaking clearly. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, just check. I think it may be on your side. It's very clear on our side. Matthew, if you can just also try to raise your voice a little bit.
Sure. Is this better, Chairperson?
There's been very.
Joseph? Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Continue.
And then just shout at me, Chairperson, if you can't hear me, or if I go too fast or anything like that, or too soft. So I think, Chair, I mean, one of the key issues that we were challenging or facing before the lockdown was that many municipalities were collapsing. We had about 29 municipalities, especially in the Free State and Northwest, but also in Limpopo and a few other areas, which are not even able to pay workers on time anymore. And we all know about the high levels of service delivery protest in many poor rural areas because of the collapse of municipalities. Some of it because of corruption, others because of lack of funding, poor governance, etc. And I think, Chair, we all know about the massive levels of corruption and wasteful expenditure, also at not just municipal, but also provincial level. And then, of course, the declining state revenues, the economic recession. Next slide, Lubabalo. Chair, so I think just on a kind of broad macro issue before I get into the division of revenue bill itself, we really hope to hear a massive R1 trillion stimulus plan. We had seen the President's announcement of the infrastructure program the day before the budget speech, but in the budget speech, there's very, very little clarity about the infrastructure program, about the timelines, about the priority areas, the allocations, both from the public and also from the private sector. There's just very little information, and that'll be quite key to provincial and local government, especially where most of it will have to take place, in addition to the SOEs. We had really hoped to see many key economic and regulatory interventions. We didn't see any. We had really hoped to see much more emphasis on job retention and creation, but not much. And I think, Chair, we'd also hoped to see, and this is critical for provincial and local government especially, an emphasis around local procurement. And I'll come back to that, but we had seen very little in the division revenue bill or the budget speech. Next slide. So, Chair, we really hoped to have seen clear SOE turnaround plans, not much. New measures announced to deal with corruption and wasteful expenditure. There was very little. New revenue interventions, including at a municipal level, not much. We had called for, Chair, the reinforcement of the key departments on the front line against COVID-19, and there was quite a significant effort in that regard, so we do welcome that. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. But on the governance issues in the departments and municipalities, we didn't really see much interventions there. Next slide, Lubabalo. Chair, we do agree with Treasury and government that we need to have a proper debt reduction plan, but we are a bit worried about, we think Treasury is putting the cart before the horse and it should be the other way around. We think the way to reduce the debt is to stimulate the economy and then thus be able to grow the revenue. And of course, to deal with corruption and wasteful expenditure. We're worried about cutting expenditure and not having a stimulus plan for the economy. And we feel that's going to give us the worst of both scenarios. But we do agree we need to have a realistic, pragmatic debt plan. Chair, around the corruption and wasteful expenditure, we really feel government is being too soft on every front. The Auditing Act was amended about 2 years ago. We don't recall any managers being held accountable in that regard. And the stories of corruption and wasteful expenditure in provincial and local government are just mind-boggling. We don't feel there's significant political accountability to the political leadership of provincial and local government. Now and then one mayor will be put on holiday, but not much beyond that. We have seen very little from the NPA and SAPS in their regard. We had hoped, Chair, that we would have long moved beyond a broad, placid commitment to lifestyle and forensic audits to see something actually happening, especially for those in supply chain management at a provincial and local level. And then, Chair, we'd also really hope to see the Chief Procurement Office at Treasury being jacked up to help to try to intervene in these provincial and local government, even though they might say it's out of their constitutional jurisdiction. So, Chair, just on the division revenue bill itself, look, we do support the reallocation of funding for these key departments, especially health and transport, basic education, human settlements, water, and sanitation. That is quite critical. And we're quite pleased how quickly that was able to be done by government. But we do think that government missed the other key part of the reprioritization by not reinforcing the key economic departments, because as much as you want to save lives, you must also save people's jobs. An unemployed person cannot be healthy for long, and vice versa. So we really felt that taking funds away from the Departments of Employment and Labour, Trade and Industry, Agriculture is a big mistake. Next slide. Chair, a few kind of overall frustrations with the dividend revenue bill is that as much as it's a huge bill, the entire budget package is almost 1,000 pages or so, but you actually get very little clarity about the impact of the reprioritization. So it's very difficult to say, is this shifting of funds from one program to another program, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Some of the departmental reprioritizations, it looks positive, where it mentions that they're reducing expenditure on traveling, on advertising, on consultants. Fantastic. But you don't get the full impact upon what is the impact of reprioritization on infrastructure programs, or the not filling of critical posts, etc. And I think if we could have much more clarity from government in the budgets in future, it could tell you if this is reducing wasteful expenditure, which would be fantastic, or is it austerity cuts, which might come back to hurt us down the road. Next slide. So, Chair, members would probably recall that about 2 weeks ago, the Auditor General released his findings, and there was nothing that we should be shocked by, as much as the findings are quite damning. It's what the AG has been saying for many years now. And we're just highlighting it, Chair, because the supplementary budget and the division revenue speech are silent on these findings. So we're pumping in massive money, but the fact is that less than 10% of municipalities receive clean audits. 28 municipalities simply cannot even be audited because they don't even bother to submit the financial statements. 10% is just amazing, but those mayors remain in place. The municipal managers are not dealt with. 200 municipalities lost over 2 billion rand in the past year. And then, of course, Chair, you would see the trajectory in irregular spending is increasing massively from 24 billion 3 years ago to 32 billion 2 years ago. And we expect it will get worse and worse. Of course, I think members would have seen the comical issue in OR Tambo District Municipality a week ago, where they spent, I think it was 6 million rand to go door to door, allegedly visiting 4,000 people about Corona. Again, why would you go door to door when there's a pandemic? It doesn't make sense. I never heard of door to door, Comrade Chair, costing 4 million rand. And then, Chair, of course, whilst there's been many positive interventions by government in the past few years about reducing consultant expenditure, but you'll see that municipalities spent about 1 billion rand on it, and that money should rather be spent to create permanent capacity in municipalities, not to be outsourcing the work for profit. Next slide. Chair, of course, we would also know that every year Eskom loses about 20 billion rand, yet provincial and local government owe about 37 billion rand. And we would all know those stories of Eskom having to take countless municipalities to court every single month to get them to pay up. But again, the supplementary budget and the division revenue don't speak to how are they going to intervene on that front, to deal with the mismanagement or to deal with the underfunding. Chair, again, the Auditor General tells us that we lose about 150 billion rand every year to corruption, wasteful expenditure, but there are no measures in the supplementary budget or the division revenue bill about how we're going to plug those holes. And we all know provincial and local government, in addition to the SOEs, are our weakest link. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So, Chair, just a few issues on a few key departments. So far, 63 municipal workers have died from COVID-19. 4,500 have been confirmed as positive. That's about 4 times the infection rate for the nation as a whole. Many of the municipal workers who are being affected are your refuse cleaning municipal workers. And it really shows you that municipalities are not providing those workers with the necessary PPE or the necessary sanitization programs. And that's going to have a spillover effect not only on those workers, but also on communities as municipalities are not able to collect refuse on a daily basis as per the normal programs. We find many municipalities, Chair, are not compliant with COVID-19 directions. They don't have decent sanitization programs. They're not ensuring the taxi ranks or bus stations are kept clean. And this is going to really hamstring government's progressive interventions on this front. Chair, I won't go into the public service wage bill too much, but I need to highlight it quickly because Treasury wrote to SALGA recently to say that SALGA must walk away from the 2020 wage agreement with municipal workers. It's the same thing that we saw at national level.
Sorry, Matthew. Honourable members, please mute your microphones. Honourable members, we are getting a feedback. Please mute your microphones. Thank you. Please continue, Matthew.
Sure. So, Chair, we have to highlight it because whilst we have the fight at the Public Service Bargaining Council, which I don't need to go into the details too much, we're now going to have a similar fight at a local government level. The 2020 wage agreement for local government is meant to come into effect in July. And then about a week ago or so, Treasury wrote to SALGA to say they need to walk away from the agreement. It's going to be very difficult to manage workers' angers when municipal workers feel that they're having a very high levels of infection, 4 times the national average, and then their small little inflation increase is going to be taken away from them. And we should bear in mind that many municipalities pay quite a low wage as compared to the public service. We think the better approach, Chair, and we are very sensitive to the fiscal crisis facing the state. We don't want to see the state collapse. We know if it does collapse, the people who pay the price would be workers, so we need to manage the situation constructively. But I think the better option, Chair, is simply to fast track the next 3-year or even a 5-year wage agreement and see how can we assist government to save expenditure. And we think there's significant ways. The first way alone, Chair, is that inflation has come down by almost half. It's come down from the 5.5% in the previous budget estimates to about 3%. It might even go as low as 2.8%. We think there are progressive ways to look at it that you protect working and middle class workers with inflation increases, and then you reduce expenditure for management, for politicians, for executives, etc. And of course, Chair, we think there are some options for the PIC to help workers who are struggling with home loans, etc. But Chair, we think it's going to provoke a very dangerous situation if you expect municipal workers to be at the forefront and then you tell them, by the way, guys, we don't think we must give you an increase, but councillors would get one. Chair, on basic education, I think we're now paying the consequence, Chair, for years of neglect around school infrastructure. We all know that every year the department promises us they're going to deal with the hundreds of schools who don't have toilets, the thousands which don't have decent levels of sanitation. We're now paying the consequence. SAD2 and the other teachers' unions have done a significant amount of research, which I'd be happy to share, members, if that'll be of interest to them, around the levels of readiness of schools for reopening. And these are just some of the figures. It's only 54% of schools have sufficient sanitizers for learners and teachers. 43% of schools only have received the water tanks that they needed. So 57% haven't received the water tanks yet. Only 27% of schools have at least 2 masks per learner and staff. And 47% of schools don't have enough teachers because of comorbidities. And then about 31% of schools don't have sufficient water for regular washing of learners' hands and so forth, Chair. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. Chair, on the Department of Health, I think there's been a significant reallocation and reprioritization to help that department. That is welcome, but we are a little bit concerned about 2 points. One is that it appears there's a reduction in the allocation for personnel expenditure. In fact, we think we need to actually be employing more nurses, more doctors, and we're increasingly seeing the shortages at our hospitals in that regard. Chair, we're also worried that as much as we support building massive temporary health facilities because of the pandemic, and they need to do it very, very quickly, but we're worried that this is at the expense of investing in permanent health infrastructure. So it's fantastic to have the convention centers become temporary hospitals, but we should not also be looking at investing permanently in expanding the capacities of our tertiary hospitals and our clinics and so forth. Next slide, Chair. Chair, around transport, just a few quick issues. I mean, again, there was a significant reallocation of funding, which we appreciate. But I think, Chair, what's worrying in the division revenue bill is that there's no clarity around plans for Metro Rail. Very few lines of Metro Rail have been reopened. In Cape Town, only one line has been reopened because they don't have the health and safety plans which national government requires for them to do so. We're seeing as a consequence increasing levels of cable theft on Metro Rail. Chair, we do support government's effort to give relief to the taxi industry, but we think they need to finalize that agreement quickly. The 1.1 billion is supported, but we don't think, Chair, it can simply be a blank check. The taxi industry is notorious for lawlessness. We believe that most of the owners are not in compliance with the various tax laws of the country, but in particular, they're not in compliance with the labor laws, the UIF, the COIDA, etc. So we feel that if government is going to give them the relief which we support, it needs to be conditional. They must be able to provide the UIF certificates, the COIDA registration certificates. It can't be just simply we are afraid of some bullies and we just hand over money blank. During this pandemic period, Chair, it was quite interesting that the taxi industry was begging the UIF to give them funding, but taxi drivers are not registered for the UIF. And that's 250,000 workers, Chair. So if we're looking at sustaining the UIF, for example, or COIDA, where every worker must contribute and every employer must contribute, then this industry has to be held accountable. Next slide, Chair. Chair, just coming towards the end. Look, again, I think we welcome the reprioritization for human settlements and water and sanitation, but there's really a huge amount of information which is not provided for in the division of revenue bill or the supplementary budget. And given the experiences of many years on this front, it makes us question whether or not the targets will be achieved. So we don't get an indication of how many informal areas are going to be upgraded, by when. We don't get an indication of how many will still lack access to decent sanitation and sufficient water. And Chair, this is really going to make our fight against the pandemic very difficult. If you simply look at the city of Cape Town, most of the hotspots are in informal areas, in Khayelitsha and Gugulethu and Philippi, etc. And you can see the correlation between the two. It's impossible to have decent sanitation if Joe Slovo and Langa, thousands are sharing a few toilets, which are never cleaned. Chair, I think the other slides, I don't need to really go into too much. It's more for members' benefit and information sharing. It's not related to the division revenue bill itself, but it speaks to our belief in why we need a massive stimulus plan and so forth. We can just fly through the slides very quickly. Next slide, Lupabalo. Kind of the key economic sectors where we felt there is needs to intervene in the economy to boost it, to fast track it, to create new jobs. So just highlighting some of those areas, Chair. Next slide. Yeah, again, some more issues, which some of them which are relevant to provincial local governments, for example, paying supplies within 30 days, cracking down on illicit goods and so on. Next slide. The infrastructure program, again, Chair, this is critical to growing the economy, but both the DRR bill and the budget are largely silent on it. Next slide. Economic relief measures, Chair, I won't go into it, but again, just for members' benefit, because this isn't really about the bill. Next slide. Yeah, again, the social relief measures are just for members' benefit. Next slide. SOEs, again, for members' benefit. Next slide. So I think, Chair, maybe the last point I just wanted to make is that government has done a lot of work with Business for South Africa around procuring your protective and personal equipment for workers, for the public at large. Critical departments in that regard, Chairperson, are the big procurement departments like basic education, the provincial departments of health, the big uni-cities, etc. COSATU and its affiliate SACTU have done a lot of monitoring work to check, are those provincial and local governments procuring those masks, the gloves, the sanitizers, the plastic screens, the testing kits, the temperature screens, are they procuring them locally? In the beginning stage, Chair, over 90% of those equipments were being purchased from overseas, largely from China, which is a huge crisis because most of those equipment can be produced locally, and most factories have geared themselves to produce it. we've managed to get that significantly shifted with business for assets procurement to kind of reverse those trends. So that's a positive trend there, Chair. But the weak link, and why I'm raising it, is that we are struggling to get any information from provincial and local government. The provincial departments of health and education across the country simply refuse to provide information. And we suspect, Chair, that there's two issues at play. One is that they are largely not in compliance with National Treasury regulations requiring local procurement. And secondly, that there is frequently an element of corruption where I'll give a procurement order to my friend. He's going to import it from China, and we'll share a little bit of a kickback. And this, Chair, it's a huge crisis because it undermines government's local procurement commitments. It threatens local industries when they need the most help to survive, and it really undermines our job creation efforts, Chair. But really, from what you've seen, Chair, is that provincial government is the biggest culprit in that regard. But let me stop there, Chairperson, and hopefully the presentation was audible for Honourable Joseph and for members. Thank you very much.
Hi, Matthew, thank you. You still have got 8 minutes to go if you still wanted to emphasize certain things.
Hey, I've been forced to behave for so many years by the Honourable Chairperson Yunus Karim to stick to 15 minutes. So
okay,
I also didn't want to abuse members' hospitality. So thank you, Chairperson.
No problem. Thank you. PBO. Nelia Janchis, Mohammed, the doctors, are you there?
Yes, good morning, honourable members. I will be doing the slides this morning on the amended Division of Revenue Bill.
Right. Okay, so, we have got 30 minutes. My stopwatch is on already. Nelia.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. So just in terms of an introduction, some of the highlights of our analysis are that the policy priorities towards addressing the COVID-19 pandemic relate mainly to national and provincial government. However, the reprioritization of funds are mainly towards national and local government. On a national level, amendments are made for transfers to support households and also to the land bank. And on a local government level, amendments are made towards transfers to support local governments' revenue shortfalls. However, on a provincial government level, the provincial equitable share had to be reprioritized towards the needs of the COVID-19 pandemic. And members should just also note that not the entire budget, the 2020 budget, were reprioritized. Funds are still available in programs to continue with the normal function of government. Next slide. So in terms of the strategic and budget priority for government, in specific in this supplementary budget, the main priority is to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, which includes health, social services, and peace and security. In terms of primary health, government prioritized public health to save lives. They're scaling up capacity in the public health system, and they also contract the private sector to assist with this need. In social development, the reprioritization was to scale up and maintain social assistance interventions for distressed and vulnerable households. They also reprioritized funding to prepare for social facilities, for safe reopening and service delivery. And they also reprioritized towards funding of psychosocial services for people affected by the virus. In peace and security, the priority is to increase deployment of the police service and National Defence Force during this lockdown. Next slide. So this table shows that reprioritization already started in 2019-20. You can see on a national department level, 9.9 billion has been reprioritized, of which provincial conditional grants were increase of 0.3 billion, and on a local government there was a reduction of 1.7 billion in the 2019-20 financial year, of which the equitable share was reduced by 1.3 billion and the conditional grants by 0.4%. And there are reasons given for these reductions by the National Treasury. Debt service cost was reduced downwards by 0.2%. And then the total of the main budget expenditure was increased by 8.3 billion in the 2019-20 financial year. Then when we move to the 2020 financial year, the one that is under discussion at this moment, is on a national department level. There was revisions of 32.6 billion, which includes a reduction of indirect transfers to local government of 1 billion. Provinces were reduced by 4 billion, which is mainly on conditional grants, which are allocated towards policy priorities and spending priorities. On a local government level, there was a reduction or increase of 7.4 billion, which includes the increase of 11 billion on the equitable share, and the conditional grants were decreased by 3.6 billion. And then provisional allocations not assigned to votes. In the regional budget, it was a reduction of 7.8%, but members must also realize there is still a 19.6 billion rand that has been reallocated and reprioritized within the current budgets that's not allocated towards votes already. In terms of debt service costs, there's an increase of 7.2% in this new revised budget, and the contingency reserve of 5 billion has not been allocated. It is still there, and this will be allocated during the main adjusted budget during the medium-term budget policy statement process. The main budget expenditure revisions amounts to 43.2 billion in total. Next slide. The next slide is showing the changes to the shares in the division of revenue. So over years, we can see that the National Treasury really, the intention of the allocations were to reduce allocations towards the national sphere of government and to increase the allocations towards provinces and local government. If you just look at the red bar on the national departments, is showing the current revised share allocated towards national government of 50.1%. In the original budget, it was estimated to be 49.2%, but now with the revisions, it actually has increased to 50.1%. On a provincial government level, the share to provinces amounts to 41%, and which was initially estimated to be at 42.2%. On a local government level, the revised share is now 8.9%, and the original budget allocated a percentage share of 8.6% to local government. So local government shares actually increased, provinces decreased, and national government increased with a revised division of revenue. Next slide. In terms of the changes to the spending priorities, if you can see the bottom table, increases were made, the main increases were made to health of 2.9 billion, community development increased by 2.1% or changes of 2.1 billion, social development increased by 25 billion. The sectors that were reduced are economic development, which were reduced by 7.5 billion, and learner and culture sector has been reduced by 13 billion. Next slide. So in terms of the repurposing of the provincial equitable shares, 3.7% of the equitable shares were reprioritized towards COVID-19, of which 15 billion were directly reprioritized towards health and 5 billion towards other departments. But what to note is that the equitable share stays exactly the same. It was just a reprioritization of funds within the provincial equitable shares. Next slide. In terms of the suspension of provincial conditional grants, in terms of the provision, next slide, previous slide, sorry. Next slide, Lubabalu. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide.
Slide number.
Yes, that's right. In terms of the suspension of provincial conditional grants, in the top line, the direct conditional grants has been revised by 3.9 billion. But on the right-hand column, you can see there was also a repurposing of 7.4 billion in direct grants to conditional grants to provinces. In terms of agriculture, there was a revision of 438 million. In terms of basic education, there was a revision of 2.3 billion, but also 4.5 billion of the basic education grants were repurposed. In terms of health, there was an increase of 2.8 billion. And there was also, in addition to that, there was a reprioritization of almost 2 billion within the health grants. In terms of human settlements, there was a revision of 1.7 billion and also a reprioritization or the repurposing of 378 million. In terms of sports, arts and culture, there was a revision of 536 million, and there was also a small repurposing. In terms of the transport grants, there was a revision of 1.7 billion and a small repurposing as well. In terms of the suspension of the local government conditional grants, the next slide, the equitable share was revised by 11 billion. And members should also realize that this revision is now unconditional. So municipalities will use this amount with their own discretion. In terms of the direct conditional grants, there was a revision of 3.6 billion and a repurposing of 9 billion. The biggest amounts here are allocated towards urban settlement development, a revision of 1.1 billion and a repurposing of 2.3 billion. The public transport network grant was also revised by 1.9 billion, and the Western Cape actually indicated that this grant they will not be able to use this money, and it can be used for reprioritization. And this is not a unique situation, Honourable Chair. These kind of things happen all the time during normal budgets as well, that municipalities indicate that they won't be able to use money, and then funds are moved forward when the department or the municipality is ready to be able to spend that money. Next slide. So members, during the last few days, there was a lot of discussions in terms of the revision and the repurposing of conditional grants. So over time, the PBO has also done some analysis of the schedules to the Division of Revenue Bill, especially on the schedules that's available with more detailed information to members, because members don't have access to business plans, for example. So we evaluate the information of the schedules, and what we found is that the performance indicators in the conditional grant frameworks are mainly output driven, and members actually indicated that they really want to see the impact that these grants are making. There are, in some cases, large numbers of outputs in most of the conditional grants, and now the additional purpose of these conditional grants will even increase these indicators, especially in terms of the needs for the COVID-19 pandemic. A direct link with budget per output is also not possible. Therefore, the determination of efficiency is not possible. And this is what monitoring and evaluation is actually all about, is in terms of how to link budget with performance. And I indicated that the performance indicators are mostly output driven, The performance indicators in the grant frameworks do not provide any impact indicators, and performance does not show improvement, which makes it difficult for oversight bodies, specifically Parliament, to determine the effectiveness of funds spent. And some of these evaluations we've already sent out to members to look at, but we will also try and do a presentation on all our findings. Just to provide you with a summary of the amendments made and what was required for the COVID-19 pandemic. On the left-hand side, the pandemic required to increase the treatment of patients. For that, we need personnel. And also just to mention in terms of personnel, one of the main indicators or priorities of the NDP was for health to provide an HR plan. So I'm not sure if the new allocations for personnel will increase that or will influence the HR plan, and whether the HR plan is still in place, because that was one of the priorities for the first 5 years of the implementation of the NDP. In terms of, we had to spend additional money for health equipment, and also in addition to that, we also had to contract the private sector. But the contracting of the private sector is also one of the main priorities for the implementation of the National Health Insurance. In terms of the prevention and to prevent the spread of the virus, we had to lock down, and people are now working, or staff members are working from home. So there's a big saving on administration, and that allowed us to reprioritize funds in terms of the operations of government. Also, as a result of the lockdown, some projects can be postponed or could be postponed. And then, but also projects can be postponed, but also the lockdown causes a loss of revenue because there was a loss in employment. We also need additional assistance for social needs, and that was provided through the additional conditional grants that's been provided by this new bill. In addition to these changes in terms of the COVID-19, there was also other changes reflected in the amendments of the supplementary budget, which includes the changes to PRASA, as well as the additional funds allocated to the land bank. One shortcoming that I can just also mention in terms of the amendments to the Division of Revenue is that there are no additional indication of how the outputs will be changed, which makes it very difficult for oversight bodies, especially Parliament, to monitor the allocation of these funds and how it can be monitored, and there is also no time frames allocated to it. So over the past few days as well, there was a lot of discussions on the impact of the COVID-19 on the revenue and expenditure on local government. And there was also yesterday an indication that metros reported a drop of 30% in revenue collection, but the full impact of this is still uncertain. So we are showing you the current numbers that was available until the end of the third quarter. So in terms of preliminary outcomes, Metro's actual revenue collection indicated that they collected 63.3% of the revenue in terms of their budget. When we compare this with the same period in the previous financial year, the collection was on 66.5%. Municipalities indicated that they collected 69.8% of the 2019-20 revenue as budgeted. In 2018-19, it was actually a bit lower. It was at 67%. In terms of expenditure, at the end of the third quarter, Metro's expenditure was at 60.7% in the 2019 budget. So you can actually also see that there's slower spending as well. Or even though the revenue collection is lower, it actually matches the trend in expenditure. In terms of municipalities' expenditure at the end of the third quarter, it was at 61.1%. Next slide. We thought we will also just look at the capital expenditure per province as at the end of the third quarter. You will see that only 5 provinces spending on the capital budgets were above 60%. But also to note is that some of these budgets has already been adjusted since the original budgets has been tabled. Next slide. In terms of capital expenditure per metro, you can see the expenditure there as at the end of October, end of March. Nelson Mandela actually spent it already 188, so they overspent on their capital budget. But also to note that budget was reduced downwards already in terms of the adjustments. The other one that stands out is the city of Tshwane. So what that means, you can't really spend less than what you have. That actually means that that capital budget has been reduced by 25%. Next slide. So members, just as in conclusion and summary of what our analysis is showing is that not all revisions within the supplementary budget are due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There were other amendments also made. The biggest share of the national revenues is allocated to the national sphere of government. And what we require there is efficient and effective spending should contribute to stimulate the economy, especially on a national government sphere, because that is one of the main purposes, is basically to make sure that we can stimulate the economy and the environment is conducive for economic growth. Additional funding for COVID-19 does not focus on provincial health and social needs. Provinces had to reprioritize their own health budgets to make sure that they provide for the additional needs. Additional funding for COVID-19 does not, yes, I don't want to repeat that. Additional funding to local government is not to improve or increase services. The additional funding to local government is basically just to cover the under collection in terms of services. The conditional grant funding to improve services have been reduced. Not sure if this could have an impact on the continuity of projects that has already been started, or it will only influence new projects. In terms of the effect of the suspension of conditional grant funds cannot be monitored because no targets has been set in the grant schedules for 2020. So what this is saying is that in the schedules that are available to members, no targets has been set for the 2020 budget. If members want to monitor the real performance on conditional grants, you will have to go to annual reports, which then also is 1 year behind. So we are never up to date with the performance on conditional grants because the business plans of conditional grants are not actually provided to our members. Another debate that I also want to mention, which is not on the slide, is about the consideration of the zero-based budgeting. So members, there are many ways to set up a budget and many types of budgeting systems. But I don't think this is the main issue here. The issue is that government implemented a performance-based management system, which includes program performance budgeting, of which one of the components is monitoring and evaluation. If we can implement M&E properly, the evaluation of programs will show the blockages to performance. So whether it is the content of the program, the content or the context in which the program is implemented, or whether we have the capacity in terms of personnel or funding, an evaluation will be able to identify that. So whether it is that we have to go back to zero-based budgeting, or whether we just have to change some of the content of the context of a program, will assist when we do an evaluation, and then to be able to implement the priorities of government. Thank you. I think my colleague Dumisani also wants to add before we finish.
Yes, thank you so much, Lilia. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, all members. I think we had the impression that we had limited time for the presentation, so we left some points out of the presentation. But I thought, since we have a bit of time in terms of my timer, to just add on those points on what Nelly has been saying. I think it was also maybe because we anticipated a lot of public hearings that not take place in this regard. Just a quick, adding on what Nelly has been saying, globally, we have seen governments, including South Africa, using both fiscal and monetary measures to support economy and to deal with economic effects of COVID-19 lockdowns and shutdowns. And I think, as you have seen, Chair and honored members from Nelia's presentation, that in our case, the adjusted DORA was primarily aimed at responding at the COVID-19 related pressures with limited focus on economic recovery. And then, it is therefore fair to expect that the MTPS will provide some of the detailed plans, from government. Can you hear me, Chair? Hello, Chairperson, can you hear me?
Yes, continue, I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, So it is fair expectation that the MTPS will provide governments more detail in terms of how government support both the pressures from COVID-19 and also the economic recovery measures. And also given that it was emphasized that this adjustment budget, it's largely a bridge towards the MTPS. And we have emphasized in our revised fiscal framework presentation last week, Chair, that we've shown some of the key measures that were noted by the President in terms of how government ought to respond or will be responding in terms of recovery and so on. And I've highlighted some of the few points related to doing as much as we can to limit the damage in the economy and society and people. But of course, there's some measures now in the adjustment which somehow could be seen as countering that. When you look at the revision in some of the spending, of course, we'll talk about the adjustments. The second point also want to highlight is the economic, to get the economy back into recovery path, including look at green economy. And also relief packages important to also support small business. And I think we've seen that in the adjusted budget, there has been a lot of efforts to try to support small, medium enterprises. Of course, the informal sector has had a bit of a pain in getting some of the supports in this regard. But also, one of the last point I want to highlight from the President's points was around the new infrastructure programs and maintaining the current infrastructure is a very significant part of what government and the President has announced as a way of trying to support the recovery of the economy. The revised DORA has shown that there was less focus on support. As I mentioned that, when you look largely in terms of the extent of reprioritization, suspension of the provincial and local government conditional grants, which are supportive of, would have been supportive, or we expect to support both social and economic infrastructure in that regard. And you look at human settlements, provincial maintenance of roads, education grants, and also in the local government, urban settlement development, and so many of the grants that were revised and also suspended. And I think the government noted that one of the main reasons why it was important to some of these suspensions is that there were signs that some of the money would not have been used by either by government.
2 minutes, Dr. Judges.
Yes. But the point there, Chair, is that it has been happening over the time where, it's not only now where we've seen revision of some of this spending, it's been even before the COVID-19. Therefore, Parliament may require government to provide service delivery and economic impact of some of these reprioritizations over time, and more so towards the MTPS. Quick point I want to emphasize on the infrastructure spending. Government reports shows that over the years, there has been a history of significant underspending or lack of investments in all spheres, by all spheres of government, including state-owned infrastructure over the years. And as a result, the NDP targets for public spending on infrastructure are far to be realized in that regard. And largely, I mean, the reasons why, one of the main reasons of lack of investment over the years or underspending has been clear lack of national strategy or approach towards infrastructure planning over the years, and until recently, where we've seen some of the plans being put out where the national strategy on infrastructure spending, but also due to poor oversight by various bodies with regards to spending infrastructure. Therefore, Parliament may request government to provide details of some of these targeted plans, projects on infrastructure spending over the short and medium term, which will stimulate economic growth, and also the role of the private sector in that regard. One particular industry which I want to highlight is the construction industry as related jobs that have seen has been one of the main victims of lack of spending on or investment in infrastructure by all spheres of government over the years. With the recent 2-3 years, has been more painful in the industry. When you look at the industry contribution to GDP, has contracted over the past on every quarter for the past year or two. The last time the contribution of construction industry was positive was in second quarter of 2018. It shows that there has been a big lack of investment in that regard. But also there's still a lot of jobs also having lost in that sector or in that industry. It shows that if you spend more money there, you are able to bring more economic activities, which also absorb more labor force in that regard. Therefore, the Parliament may be aware that there's currently specific sector by government for infrastructure projects over the short and medium term across all provinces, which touch on transport, human settlement, water and sanitation, and agriculture and agro-processing. Unfortunately, these are some of the areas where the representation has been targeted to reduce the spending or suspend. So there are expected 1.4 million jobs to be raised in that regard. Lastly, Chair, I want to also comment on, quickly on the issues around revise of spending in some of the areas. And it is very important to ensure that the spending around investment, research, innovation, investment in new technologies and human capital information becomes a key part of recovery going forward. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, PBO. Honorable members, you know how we do it. I'm sure the support staff will help me with the names which are there, so that we note them. I'll just have to take the names, then I will take it from there and see how much time do we have. Lubabalo Darren, what do we have there?
Lubabalo here, Chairperson. I have noted Honorable Ryder, Honorable Ocamp, Honorable Kaiso, Chair.
Babal, I'm writing down, so.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not recording you. So it's Honorable Ryder,
Honorable Ocamp, Honorable Kaiso.
Right.
Just a second, Chairperson. I'm checking that aside. Honorable Moletsane.
Right.
Honorable Peters.
Right.
Honorable Karim.
Karim.
Honorable Tikhale. Honorable members, is there any member that I am missing?
Dennis Joseph, I've seen my message through. Dennis Joseph.
Honorable Joseph, Chair.
Njadu.
Honorable Njadu.
I think so far, Chairperson, that's all the names that I have noticed from my side. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable members, here are the names I'm having so that we make sure that you don't fall into the crevices. I've got Honorable Ryder, Honorable Okamp, Honorable Kaiso, Honorable Litsane, Honorable Peters, Honorable Karim, Honorable Tihale, Honorable Joseph, Honorable Njadu. Do I have any other names that we may have left out? Okay, looks like we don't. Honorable members, let me give each and every one of you 3 minutes. I may take a little bit of injury time, but let's stick to 3 minutes and see how far we go. You can ask questions from both presentations. And can I request the presenters to take the questions which are directed to them? Thank you very much. I will start with Honorable Ryder. Honorable Ryder, can you please break the ice?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, colleagues and presenters. Thank you very much for your efforts and time that you've put in. Brief comment on COSATU. I think, yeah, a good presentation. Well done, Mr. Parks, as usual. And I find myself agreeing with a lot of the rhetoric. We don't often agree with each other across the board, but again, this time we find each other agreeing with each other. Especially, I welcome the fact that there were some interesting comments around taxis, saying that there's no blank check and there must be accountability and follow through. And I think I want to endorse that. I also want to say that rhetoric needs to be extended. I think everyone who gets anything out of this budget should be most grateful for every penny that they get, because if you're getting something, it means someone else is not getting it. So no blank checks, and I think every allocation in this budget comes with serious responsibilities. The one thing that I do want to just mention to COSATU is that, yeah, as I say, I find myself agreeing with a lot of what you're saying here, but I'm finding a mismatch between the rhetoric in Parliament and the rhetoric that we're seeing on the ground, certainly in at municipal level, where some of your members do not seem to be as on board with the national project that you appear to be here in Parliament. So that's my first input. Then on the PBO, PBO, a little bit of criticism from my side today, because frankly, in the Money Bills Amendment Procedure Related Matters Act, it tells us that you will be established and that your main objective, and I'm quoting here, the main objective of which is to provide independent, objective and professional advice and analysis to Parliament on matters related to the budget. I'm finding not sufficient advice or interpretation coming from you. I'm feeling very strongly that what we're getting is a Treasury presentation, and we need a little bit more kind of in-depth analysis and maybe even some perhaps not opinions, but some pointers in the right direction. Just to say that. And then specifically, two issues that I want to pick on. Firstly, the fact that you mentioned that there's a link to performance to budget. Now, as members of appropriation, we can't sit through all the BRRR reports, but we need to get some indication of which departments, what their percentage budget is being spent, and the percentage of targets that is being met. I'm keeping an eye on the time, Chair. The second, and perhaps you can help us with a schedule that shows us budget spent versus targets met. And then my very last point is the Nelson Mandela budget has been reduced, but some of it's been spent already. That puts Nelson Mandela Bay already in a position where they're not going to get a clean audit, and they've been impacted by an act of Treasury. What does this say about the reality of the budget that's being presented and the DORA that's being presented? The fact that already it's not attainable. We've got the same issue with the SANDF, where the increase in their allocation is not sufficient for the additional duties. Is this a realistic budget, PBO? What are your comments? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Ryder. Honourable Okamp.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good to see you guys again. Mr. Parks, I'm going to start with you. Thank you for your presentation. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Ryder, that there's a lot of things in your presentation that we do agree with you. And as he said, it's not often that we agree with each other. If you look at the presentation given by COSATU, Mr. Chairperson, it's a very bleak picture that is being drawn there. On page 2, they are talking about municipalities collapsing. On slide 4, it's about the state-owned enterprises and the problems relating to that. On page 5, it says corruption and wasteful expenditures are going through the roof. We're talking about 10% of budgets. We are talking about, on slide 8, that only 20 out of the 257 municipalities have received clean audits. So we can carry on with all the issues that they have mentioned. The fact of the matter is that we are in trouble, and that we agree upon. We must now look at the solutions to get out of this hole that we are in. And I think that is where we differ with each other. I believe that cadre deployment is one of the biggest reasons for the problems that we currently have. And that brings me to my first question to Mr. Parks. Don't you think it is high time that people are not employed due to the fact that they are related or that they have been a struggle partner or whatever, but they are employed due to the fact that they are the best person for the job that needs to be done? That is my first question. So do COSATU agree that cadre deployment might be or is one of the most biggest issues standing in the way of recovery? Secondly, if you look at job security at the moment, at the unemployment rate, don't you think that, or let me ask you it in this way, what is the amount of people that will lose their jobs due to the prohibition of sale of tobacco? How many people in the tobacco industry will lose their jobs? And don't you think it's high time that we fight for the jobs of those people as well? The last question that I want to ask you, Mr. Parks, is with relation to state-owned enterprises. Everybody is talking around or about a turnaround strategy when it comes to state-owned enterprises. But nobody is really pinpointing what needs to be done. From the Democratic Alliance side, we have on numerous occasions in the past put out what needs to be done. Privatization needs to be done. I would like to find out from COSATU's side, what do you suggest? What must form part of that turnaround strategy that everybody is proposing, but nobody is pinpointing? We cannot get to a place where money are being put into state-owned enterprises all the time to bail them out. And at the end of the day, it's the people on ground level in South Africa that must pay that bill. It is service delivery that is trampled on due to the fact that we've got to pay out and bail out state-owned enterprises. So what is your suggestions for a turnaround there? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable Ocamp. Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Let me start welcoming the presentation made by COSATU. Of course, one would agree with a whole lot of proposal made there. They make a lot of sense from the side of COSATU. I just want to come to this issue of a wage bill. I think on a number of presentations, Honorable Chair, this matter has been coming now and then from the presentations, the issue of wage bill. And it seemed to be a tickling bomb for us, and one has been warning about this matter. But we have been getting some assurance that the matter is being attended. Now that it has been said now at the level of local government negotiations, the matter of the wage bill has been brought once more by what COSATU is saying, that a letter has been sent to the negotiators there on behalf of the local government state to step away from the commitment of the wage negotiations of 2019-2020 financial year. which then says to me is actually increasing on the problems that we are facing on the wage bill. Because the one of the public sector, it was one issue that was being said to be attended to. But should this be something that is actually happening, we definitely we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation if the government does not assist us there to cross that bridge, because it's holding a very yeah. So that's what I actually wanted to say with regard to the issue of the wage bill. Secondly, is the issue that COSATU raised around the issue of 47% of around under education. That 47% of with the education department does not have about 47% of teachers because of comorbidities. Now, it is something that one would want to suggest to COSATU. Maybe isn't it proper that they also approach the Education Portfolio Committee to engage around these issues which are related to the state of readiness of schools and these critical areas that they are raising, so that they get a proper response. On what COSATU is raising on transport, I'm especially interested on the area which talks about the conditions that needs to be attached, especially around the taxi industry. Because you can't have a situation where people, whilst we are fighting for COVID-19, mobilize for people to defy the regulations and put them in the taxis in their full 100% capacities. And also they want the government to be cooperative where they are defying. How can you become cooperative when people are defying the same regulations which seek to assist people not to die from COVID-19? So I think it makes a lot of sense that there should be at least conditionalities that are attached on this relief, especially with regard to UIF exploitation of people there. You know, I think those conditions. But what I want to encourage COSATU is to also approach the portfolio committee, relevant portfolio committee, to raise all these critical issues that have been raised here. But we may not find time to engage as ourselves at this level of the committee. on PBO.
Honorable Kais, already on my injury time.
On just one question. On PBO, if I read you well, you said that rather we should not rush to zero-based budgeting. Rather, first examine the effectiveness of our monitoring and evaluation tool that we are currently having, or we need to reconfigure that. I just want to get the clarity on it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Moletsane.
Thank you, Chairperson. Both presentations are noted. To PBO.
Honorable Moletsane.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Just raise your voice a little bit, and can you switch on your video? Want to see you?
You can't see me.
No.
All right. Let me.
There you go.
You can see me now. Oh,
yeah,
the screen was the one that was messing up. Sorry for that, Chair. Sorry
no
for
problem.
that. Then let me use other gadget so that I can check my notes. Right, to PBO. What are the specific and concrete control measures that the Parliamentary Budget Office can propose to these committees based on its studies, which will need to be implemented by government in order to ensure that corruption, maladministration, and fraud is prevented on the expenditure of COVID-19 relief funds? We are very worried about what the Auditor General's report has reflected, and a lot of money has been redirected to this area, and we are not convinced that the current financial management system are adequate and ready to safeguard such resources. Secondly, when we talk about weaker financial management and weaker monitoring and evaluation systems, we shall not only focus on local government, because even in some provinces, weaker financial management challenges still persist, and on both spheres is where service delivery programs are implemented. Lastly, Chair, what type of consequence management approaches will the PBO advise these committees about in order to make sure that it makes impact in the fight against corruption and looting? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Muletsane. Honorable Peters.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you to COSATU and PBO for the presentations. Chairperson, probably I need to start where Honorable Muletsane has left off. The issue related to the PBO being able to advise this committee on whether the injunctions for consequence management of this committee, including the parliamentary reports, has ever borne fruit, because it would be important for us to know whether there has been a positive outcome from what we have always said there should be consequence management. I'm also, maybe I must go directly to PBO and finish it. In your view, PBO, where did the resources that were pronounced by the president in terms of the 20 billion for local government and the amount that was muted for the social Department of Social Development for social relief of distress for the unemployed, where exactly did the money go to if the two entities actually claim that they did not receive it? In my understanding, the local government has been the biggest beneficiary in terms of support for water provision, but also support for the unsavory human settlements that are being attended to by human settlement. But also, PBO, is it better for departments and municipalities to surrender funds as opposed to underspending or having wasteful expenditure, or losing it out to returning to the fiscus because of consistent rollovers? The other thing that I would want PBO to also help us deal with is the issue of I've noted, Chairperson, in our communities, we are starting to see our police men and women suffering the impact of COVID. We have seen the burial of late, even in my own community in Khalishiwe in Kimberley, the burial of police officers who there's been allegations that they got infected because of being at the monitoring sites or supervision sites of funerals that people decided to violate the lockdown regulations. The COSATU, equally Honorable Kaiso raised the point, but I'm going to emphasize it. Did COSATU engage the different ministries, especially your Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, with regard to the cost of the PPEs and also the importation and overlooking the local manufacturing, but also the information that you are raising about DBE? I would believe that a Chairperson, even as this committee, we could engage with the department, but equally so with the portfolio committee of basic education, because portfolio committee of basic education needs to really make sure that they have proper oversight over this particular area where we have the low indicators for the readiness of schools to operate. So I would recommend that the committee engages with DBE committee. But equally so, did COSATU engage with the police, defense, health, with regard to these issues of the procurement, but also because these people, these areas are where the essential workers are found. But also, what is COSATU's view, especially with your indicators of the number of teachers, but not necessarily the other essential workers in the public service and as well as in the private sector? What is your view with regard to a voluntary severance package of those who are above 60 but are still employed, are in areas where they cannot work remotely or work from home, but also are presenting with comorbidities? So it is important to know what is COSATU's view and what has COSATU been able to do as the biggest representative of workers.
Peters, you're on my
no,
time.
I'm coming. I'm at the last one. I'm happy, Chairperson, that COSATU raised the concern around the health and safety of refuse removal workers. That category of people are exposed. Remember when people use tissues or whatever to sneeze and cough, they throw it into the dustbins, and these people are the people who pick up these things without the necessary PPEs, but also those who are working in water and sanitation. So I believe that it is important that we look at how COSATU can help. Yeah, okay, let me leave it, Chairperson.
Okay, did you still have one?
Yes, Chairperson.
Throw it in.
Yes, Chairperson. Is it not about time that COSATU drives the culture of payment for services, as well as especially for water and electricity, and then realize the proper subsidization of those who cannot afford? But also, has COSATU been able to engage with COSATU's own members, but also the employer in the instance of municipalities with regard to the audit outcomes in the environment of local government? Because the biggest losers will be workers in this particular instance if municipalities collapse. So that is my point, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honorable Karim.
Thank you, Chairperson. Firstly, I don't know what the co-chairs you think and the staff, support staff and members, that there's only one public submission for these hearings. Now, obviously, we had hearings on the fiscal framework last week. In fact, a substantial number, more than ever before, of the representations made to the hearings on the fiscal framework didn't deal with macroeconomic issues. Understandably, perhaps inevitably, they dealt with appropriations issues, and our secretaries have referred all those that are relevant to appropriations, the submissions to your committees. Now, there are a lot of issues there that actually we felt as a finance committee we shouldn't address, but refer to the appropriations committee. One in particular strikes me, where we asked you to process it further, was the BIG. We are currently, it's a 350 rands for the next few months until October, I think. Now, only this morning, there's an article online about Oxfam saying that South Africa now is also a hunger hotspot. Chairpersons, you know that things are very, very bad. We said in our report that hunger is stalking the country and we should consider the BIG becoming permanent. I know in the majority party that's being discussed, some of you are in the NEC, you know more than ourselves, but the point is that we should consider this as a recommendation, Chairperson. We'll urge that the committee chairs and the staff and the members look at what the fiscal framework said, which you're all supposed to read before these hearings, and see what in those recommendations apply to appropriations and how we might decide as an appropriations committee to take it further. Also, it's very difficult, Chairperson, for people to appear before the Finance Committee and then 10 days later have to appear in another public hearing. So no one's criticizing those representations that carried more appropriations issues than actually fiscal framework issues. Secondly, on the R1 trillion package, we all agree. Now, the point about COSATU is while one agrees with their values and broad aims, I know it's difficult with Matthew Parks and his team being so limited in resources compared to National Treasury and PBO and so on. But more needs to be said on exactly how each of these proposals on securing additional resources and funding can be achieved. For example, we can't keep saying we do it as a committee. So frankly, we're in the same boat. Illicit financial flows, tackle it more effectively and efficiently, set up an interministerial committee. I mean, we've been saying this for 4 years. We need to take the debate forward. So I'm pleading with Treasury, with COSATU, how dare I say Treasury, COSATU, that you know what, take these things further, help us, and PBO, help us, instead of repeating what become like platitudes, Comrade Chair. The question is, how do we do all these things? COSATU has put like headline arguments on what can be done to secure more resources. Treasury's constant reply is, where's the money? Where's the money? Let's tackle Treasury more effectively and more concretely on where we can secure funding within the restraints that South Africa's budget and the entire country finds itself. I fully support COSATU's point on local procurement and infrastructure. Comrade Chairs, all of us know the way to recover from this crisis is to focus far more on infrastructure than we're doing. Where's the resources? That again is something we need to address. And I think I'll stop there. All I might say about PBO, Chairperson, is that overall, I hear what Dennis Ryder says, but overall, PBO seems to, in the last 18 months or so, taking a much more, let's put it as a strident position, a far more, let's say, critical position of National Treasury. Not that that's necessarily good, but they're being, if you like, more independent of any constraints. I welcome that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Karim. Honorable Tikhale.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning to everybody, and let me join my colleagues in appreciating the presentations from the PBO and COSATU. I want to start with the PBO, where they are talking about the reprocessing of provincial equitable share towards COVID-19. On their last sentence, they are saying 15 billion towards health and 5 billion towards other. So my question is, can't they come with the names of this other? Because if they're not naming it, like they're saying 15 billion goes to health, then the province will end up naming these others. And tomorrow we'll end up like criticizing them when they take 4 million and put it on a door-to-door budget during lockdown. So I think if they can assist us or assist the situation by coming up with this other, what is it that the province should focus on? And also, they are talking about equitable share, but to me, I don't see the fairness on this table. For example, and if you look on Mpumalanga and Limpopo, you go to Western Cape, I would understand the others like Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, and also Northern Cape because they don't have that large population. But to me, I don't see the fairness on this table. Maybe if they can assist me in making me to understand. Hello?
No, continue.
Okay. Thank you very much. On the change in spending priorities, they are touching on the community development programs, but we are not being told as to what type of programs are they talking about. For example, you check on the rural areas where in a traditional area, they have 34 villages, whereby when you check on the population, is plus minus 90,000 people who are staying in that area, and there is no community library that is assisting those people in the area. So I just want to check if ever they can try and assist us with those programs that they are referring to, when it comes to community development. And with the COSATU, I think COSATU have notified something which is very important, whereby at the schools, the learners now are suffering. The educators are no more at the stage of whereby when it comes to this COVID-19, they are safe to go to schools. So I don't know whether they are in their programs or they meet with the Department of Education. They are trying to assist them as to what is it that can be done, because our learners after grade 12, they no more concentrating on education. They go to other areas whereby they think after completion of their studies, they'll be able to support or put something nice on the table for their families, be able to drive cars or whatever. We know very well that in all the departments, people who are suffering are teachers. So now the learners are also joining the sufferings, because their parents have agreed that they must go to school. But then when they arrive at the schools, there are no more educators, because most of them, their ages are not like allowing them to go to school during this type of COVID-19 that we are facing. I don't know whether they are able to assist the department to maybe to give them ideas as to what is it that can be done. Way back, we know very well that people would go to these schools, even if they're not like fully educated. They'll call them the temporary teachers, just to assist the situation. I don't know what is happening, but Honorable Kaiso put it very well that they should take it to the committee that deals with education. As they are doing that, they must also go with something that they should put in front of the committee. That what is it that they think can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just remind honourable members that when they speak, they must switch on their videos.
My apology, Chairperson. My apology for that.
Okay, no problem. I didn't want to interrupt you. Honourable Joseph.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentations. I want to say to Matthew, particularly COSATU, as long as we can talk, there's hope. And your presentation provides hope, so that we can openly talk directly about the status of this country, in particular local government, which I think we should have a greater interest into. I just want to make one point on COSATU. I'm covered by all the other points. Reduction plan, debt, austerity measures, AG findings, metro rail, the taxi industry, to bring them into the formal compliance industry. These points and job creation is very important. But I want to just stand still by one point, which is very central to the whole of this presentation by COSATU, which is very important, Chairperson. And that is the one line in slide 11, where they speak about we must honor local government 2020 wage agreement. Now, I'm a founder member of COSATU and believe in principles that when we engage with government from that perspective, the government must also honor their agreements. Now, if we don't do that, then we break the trust that we've built up with COSATU as a government, and that can lead to a very, very costly exercise and chaotic exercise in this country. So I think what I want to say in front of Matthew, Chairperson, our committee must deliberate on this point after the people who make presentations leave the meeting, when we are alone and speak about, because we also represent government as part of this committee. And it's a very serious point, and it's, I think, the point that I would like to focus on. We need stability in our country. We cannot afford to have a destabilized situation because Treasury, according to COSATU, is walking away from an agreement. We must visit that point, and we must create stability. That's the one point on COSATU. I'm covered by the other points the members have raised. But on public budget office, slide 8, it was mentioned by the FFC yesterday, 15 million for provinces will go to health and 5 billion, sorry, 15 billion and to health and 5 billion to the other services like social development. And by the point that was raised is that the allocation, the criteria for the allocation of money and the reporting lines for COVID-19 is important. And I even want to ask COSATU to support us here. The money that goes to municipalities must be spent properly that the people can benefit. So that is important. But the question I want to ask to the Parliament Budget Office also is on slide 16. I think Member Peters made reference to that. There's a point where they say additional funding to local government is not to improve or increase services. That's a point on slide 16. I'm quite concerned about that point. There's the economy, there's the indigent, but the money to local government must also include water and sanitation, because that part makes it COVID-19 compliant. So I just would like Parliament Budget Office to explain that slide 16 on that point that they made there. But I'm covered by the other points of the members. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Joseph. Honorable Njatu.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chairperson, on COSATU, good morning, honorable members. On COSATU, it's a very detailed and situation analyst presentation, which I welcome. And I think COSATU have done a lot of work in terms of getting a detailed presentation. I think what's important, what I would want to raise with COSATU is if we would work together in terms of coming forward with solutions on each of the detailed presentation they have made in terms of how to resolve those issues. Therefore, I think I'm covered in terms of COSATU's presentation. And then, Chairperson, on PBO. PBO, in terms of we speak on the reprioritization of funds or budgets on the provinces, on municipalities, on departments. Now, my question is, Chairperson, to PBO, on the monies not spent by those entities or departments, provinces, municipalities, departments, money is not spent. What impact does it have on COVID-19? And then the last question will be on the shares in terms of different departments in national, province, and local government, the shares. What specific informed that in terms of the presentation, what specific informed that in terms of COVID-19? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, honorable members. Lubabalo, do we have other honorable members who might have raised their hands after I've taken the names? Lubabalo?
Chairperson Darren, yeah, I don't see any other names.
Okay.
Yeah, I raised mine, Chair. It's Honorable Mpisi.
Honorable
Mpisi, Chair.
Honorable Mpisi. Anybody else, honorable members? No. Honorable Mpisi, please come in.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and appreciate the two reports. And I think I want to comment.
Honorable Mpisi, asikuboni kahle yehla uyakhatheka. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay. Let me do this, Chair. Thank you very much. Chair, there are two things that I think I want to raise. One is to say that I appreciate the presentation by Comrade Matthew Parks, that I think the issues raised by COSATU, I think it's something that we as elected leaders must definitely look at very, very serious. Yes, working together with Parliament, and COSATU has been consistent. Myself, as a former Central Executive Committee member of COSATU, I know for a fact that we've been doing submissions at that time, and even now under Matthew and the current leadership, there's been proposals that were presented into different portfolio committees in Parliament. And I think it's something that we need to appreciate as members, that COSATU has been consistently willing to work with government. And I'm happy that they did this now in this portfolio committee, that I think we need to look at finding a better way to say that it must not just be a lip service on the proposals that that was presented this morning by Comrade Parks. And one of the things that I think, COSATU has never been anti-parliament. And I think I can safely say from where I'm sitting, Chair, that also in the legislature, which I'm serving at now, we've managed to stabilize the relationship between the unions as well as the legislature in our province, because we strongly believe that if there's an engagement between the workers and the state institutions, I think we'll find a better way on jobs, Chair. And I think we know that some companies at the moment, due to COVID-19, they found an opportunity now to retrench workers. And I think it's something that we as Parliament must say that companies must begin to look at very, very serious, not to retrench workers by using this COVID-19 as a scapegoat. And I think it's Member Ocamp who said COSATU must speak on the deployment. COSATU has always been deploying its members through the African National Congress to Parliament. And I think this deployment, and including in the administration, I don't think is something wrong with the deployment. What is wrong is what we have seen in Tshwane, where people were employed under the DA municipality, where the chief of staff and some senior members were employed without proper qualifications. And I think it's something that we need to understand. If we deploy somebody in a political office, what is it that we want to see out of that particular individual? Do we know that whether the person has capacity or not? There's nothing wrong in deploying. What is wrong is whether you deploy somebody without capacity in that particular office. So from my side, Chair, I think I want to welcome both presentation. I think it makes sense to all of us, but I think what is recommended, I think we must take it forward. And I think through you, Chair, we must make sure that the recommendation presented, and a majority of members agree that COSATU should work with Parliament, should make sure that all those issues that they've raised are issues that are implementable and are implemented by the committees that they are presenting to. So I don't want us to have lip service on these issues, and I think COSATU is consistent, and I want to thank them for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable PC. Honorable members, there's just a quick check I'm going to do. Honorable Ryder, do you have one thing that you want to throw in?
No, Chair, I think we've been adequately covered. Thank you very much.
Honorable Ocamp?
Apart from just saying to the Honourable PC that the current state of our country's finances is a clear indication of the fact that incompetent cadre deployment has taken place. No, thank you, Honourable Chair. I'm fine, thanks.
Honourable Kaiso?
No, Chair, the point of order. Member Ocamp is out of order.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Honourable Kaiso? Honourable Kaiso, do you have anything to throw in? Honourable Muletsane? Honourable Muletsane?
Cover, Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Peters?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think, Chairperson, I just want to say to my sister, Honourable Dikale, that Limpopo and the Northern Cape has always had a very good rural alliance. And to listen to her saying that we in the Northern Cape, they don't need the resources, I really get worried, because it does look like she doesn't understand the challenges that a province like the Northern Cape, with the vastness that it has, that is the biggest land mass province in South Africa, more than 30% of South Africa. And the population might be sparsely populated, but everybody from Lekkerson, from Port Nolloth, Alexander Bay, right up to Gantatelang, right to Hamasepa, right to John Taulo Haiteo, where in the Northern Cape, and Pixlikaseme district, your JZFM, ZFM, your Francis Part, the people of Pokwan, they are sitting there without electricity as we speak. So the resources are needed, and it is costly to provide water and electricity, in particular, Honorable Dikale, in that type of province. So I want to say to you, the people of the Northern Cape might be watching and disappointed that they are told that they don't need the resources. I'm very sorry, I know it was a slip.
Yeah. Should we mark the 10th of July as the break of the alliance between Northern Cape and Limpopo? Honorable Karim?
Yeah, certainly. I have two very profound
Not at all.
Excuse me, Dipo, you've been speaking far longer than your time's allocated. You've overtaken me in the last 26 years. I haven't spoken so much, so now let me speak. Yes, very profound, very earth-shattering observations, Chairperson, the most important I've ever made since 1994. Firstly, really out with war, the COSATU's current leadership, something's really wrong with them. The DA is fallen in love with them. What does it say about them? Thank you very much.
I knew that that's what you were going to say before you said it.
We give credit.
No, Chair, just one point here before I step down. Apologies for that. Today we are burying my father-in-law, who was a member of this committee from 1999 to 2009, Honorable Ronald Fuki Mufokeng. We buried him this morning, and I decided to also come to this meeting in his honor. So I must raise that he was a former national treasurer of COSATU, highly disciplined, and he also chaired SCOPA at some point in the National Assembly. So I wanted to convey that message as well to all of you as honorable members. Thank you very much.
Honorable PC, our condolences to your good self and to the family and the bigger family of the ANC. Thank you.
Chairperson, I'm sorry to intrude. Wouldn't it be appropriate for you and Dikaleria on behalf of the two committees to write to the family to express our condolences and our solidarity with them in this difficult time?
Perfect. Thank you very much for that suggestion.
Ronald Mofokeng very well in both his roles. He was very good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Honorable Dikale.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and to my Honorable Dipu. I'm sure she heard me very well when I was saying the equitable share is not really fair at all, including what she was saying. When I say I understand the issue of the population, I even said they will tell us why they did it like this. I'm not saying Northern Cape is not important when we compare it with Limpopo. Mama Dipo, Mama. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dikale. Honorable Joseph, do you have anything to throw in?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity, but I'm covered. Thank you.
Honorable Jadu.
Thank you, Chair. I just want further to concur with Honorable Mpisi that the relationship between government and COSATU, and then we have to look going forward in resolving the issues that was being raised. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Mpisi, any other thing?
No, I'm covered, Chair. Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, honorable members. Can I have an opportunity to raise some questions?
Honorable Matangu first, Chair.
They didn't announce that you have arrived. With my co-chair, my apologies. Sorry. Welcome. We did receive your apology. Please come in.
Chair, I don't have much to say. I've been covered, but I just want to highlight one thing, that in each and every meeting where we have public hearings and COSATU is there, Honorable Okam is making sure that is specific in making sure that the country knows his constituency. Because when we talk about and trying to lobby COSATU on privatization, it's just a waste of breath, according to me. Because from where I stand, there's no way where COSATU have promised or have thought of privatization. They've had campaigns on anti-privatization, and so is the alliance. So I'm just appealing to you, my dear honorable member. It's not going to assist you. When you say you want privatization, who is going to benefit from those privatization? Because you are not talking for the poor. And we are not hiding it that we are biased to the poor and the working class. So privatization is not what is going to help us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mahlangu.
Maybe it's time to listen to us then.
It's my turn. Let me start with COSATU. Welcome the presentations, both the PBO and COSATU. And again, thanks the honorable members for raising very sharp issues which must be attended to, and doing that within the allocated time. So it's a good time management. COSATU, one of the things that I would like to hear you, which is my worry, obviously we want to create new jobs, but I think there's very little coming up as to how do we make sure that we retain jobs, which I think it's easier to retain jobs than to start a new job altogether. So I would like to hear you, both the public and the private sector, the SOCs, what are the plans that you are putting forward so that we create jobs? There's the whole economics behind that, because immediately somebody is not working, it has got an impact on SARS. It has got an impact on consumption. It has got impact on GDP. So there's the whole economics behind it. So I just want to hear what I was saying about the retaining of jobs. The issues of wasteful and fruitless expenditure, the unfavorable audit outcomes that you have raised. I just want to check, what consultation do you have with SALGA to deal with these evergreen problems? So that, because they keep on coming to us here in Parliament, but it's after the effect. For instance, we are dealing with the audits, and these problems are evergreen, as I'm saying. The problem of the South African economy, it's growth, and the solution will lack of growth, perhaps, and the solution will come from there. One of the questions that we asked SALGA yesterday is the question of what are municipalities doing to try and ensure that they also participate in the economic growth? Because my fear is that whenever people look at economic growth, they think that national government or even national treasury should come up with or trade and industry and competitions that are the only ones. And from where I'm seated, it is the responsibility of all of us and all spheres of government. But I think I haven't had a very strong presentation saying that as local government, that's our contribution to inclusive economic growth. You spoke about the South African Reserve Bank intervention, especially the 200 billion rand facility, and you said only about 3.5% take up has happened. There are a lot of implications from that. One, it means the businesses haven't benefited from that. But again, the fact that they're coming up with 200 billion rand is the money that we wanted to get into the economy so that it start dealing with the macroeconomic challenges of the country. It's one thing to protect the firm, but again, to have money into the economy, it does contribute directly to economic growth. But to have 3.5% of it being taken, what are the problems from your side? That's one. Two, I want you to comment on this one. I've said it's only benefiting the commercial banks. My take is that a percentage of it should also be made available to the provinces, for instance, the developmental institutions there to get into the provinces so that those people there can also have got a better access to this thing. I want to hear you what you say about that. We've been told about companies who have gone out and claim money, UIF, right? But we've heard workers saying that that money has never come to us. What's your experience and what are you proposing should happen? I think, again, you are a little bit muted on that because I think it's affecting your constituency big time. But again, and also the inflationary prices that have been charged by some of the companies exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic. Your comment on that. PBO, we're spending about consolidated expenditure for the current financial year is about 2 trillion rand. I just wanted to hear you. What do you think of that also contributing to economic transformation and broad-based black economic empowerment? What do you think is happening around? I want to hear your comment. You also talk about output but not impact. Output versus impact as if they are two different things. Can you just educate us and say what exactly are you saying as far as that is concerned? You're talking about the capital expenditure per province and metro. I didn't exactly get you exactly what is the message that you are trying to convey. Please share that with us. Lastly, can I just challenge you to assist these committees, a two-pager, for instance, to try and educate us about making a critical evaluation of the zero-based budgeting, the pros and the cons, so that we can, from where we are, also be assisted to understand exactly where we're heading to. I always believe that every solution has got its downside. So I'm just saying, critically looking at that, if you can do that for us. We have it's 11 o'clock. PBO maximum 20 minutes to respond to the issues, and COSATU maximum 30 minutes to respond to the questions. Can I then ask PBO to start? And I'll request Honorable Mahlangu to take from where we are to chair the meeting. Honorable Mahlangu, please chair for us. But I've just requested that the split of 20 and 30 between PBO and COSATU to deal with the issues that have been raised.
Excuse me, Chairperson, it's Lubabalo here. Yes, the Honorable Weber's hand was up until a few seconds ago, so I do not know whether this is appropriate time for him to ask the question before my colleagues start with their responses to the questions from members.
Sizolo are going to fight because that's why I had to go back again and try and get other members to come in. So, Lubaba, you should have told me. But Honorable Weber, please come in.
Chairperson, I didn't want to participate in this debate, but I listened very carefully to what was said, and I believe that Mr. Ocampo was completely misunderstood. I understood him as being on the side of the poorest of the poor. He wanted us to implement the policies of the winning nations, and I'm afraid that the ANC is copying the policies of the failing nations of the world. And I think that you have completely misunderstood Mr. Ocampo. I thank you.
Okay, honorable members, you'll get the date of the debate today. We're receiving the inputs from COSATU and PBO. Just bank your debates. We'll definitely do have a day for the debate of the policies that we were talking about. Can I then request PBO to start with the response? Yeah, and 20 minutes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'll be quick because some of these things questions we can also take offline, and some of the education questions we can also organize another meeting in terms of zero-based budgeting in specific. So the purpose of our presentation was basically to assist members in considering and processing the 2020 supplementary budget. Specifically in terms of the adjusted division of revenue bill. This was the purpose of this meeting. And the mandate of the PBO is to analyze the documents that are tabled by the Minister of Finance. If members want to request additional analysis of budgets, that can be considered, but it depends on capacity, and requests must come through the chairperson of our committees. That is in terms of the budget for Mandela Bay. We cannot just say that it was a realistic or non-realistic budget. You really need a comprehensive analysis of a budget, including the IDP of a municipality, to get to the results and to be able to determine whether it was realistic or not. All our analysis is technically based, and it's based on a budget analysis framework which is approved by our previous director. In terms of understanding the zero-based budgeting and also M&E, what we're trying to say is that it's not possible to zero-base all programs in government. It has got its advantages, but it's not realistic to do all of them because there's also legislative responsibilities in terms of funding health and all the other social programs. But we can also have an additional meeting on zero-based budgeting and what is required. In terms of M&E, what we are saying is by implementing a proper monitoring and evaluation system, one can already determine why programs are not performing or why programs are not spending efficiently and effectively. It's not necessary that it is a funding issue. It can also just be a content issue in terms of how the priorities and how the objectives and performance indicators of a program has been developed. In terms of the question of the EFF, it's totally out of our mandate to do audits or financial statements to determine whether there is corruption or malmanagement or spending in terms of budgets on a local government level. And in terms of the consequence management, it is the responsibility of all accounting officers basically to implement the performance management system on a departmental basis. In terms of the surrendering of funds, Honourable Peters, that happens all the time. And when a province or a department is not ready to spend, sometimes something goes wrong. It might be in terms of a tender, then it's actually better to surrender the funds to be allocated to where it is needed and where it can be spent, rather than to hold on to the funds and underspend. So it's much better to reprioritize in time for somebody else to spend. For example, in education or health, or when the project is ready to maintain a road, for example. In terms of the equitable share, so the equitable share formula provides for 48% on education and 27% for health. And then there's a basic component of 16%. The institutional component is 3%, and then there's an economic component of 1%. So this is how the provincial equitable shares are allocated towards provinces. The 3.7% was the only guideline that was given to provinces for reprioritization. And the 3.7% of the respective equitable shares came to 20 billion. And then 15 billion was directly allocated towards health, and the other 5%, it's the own discretion of provinces how they're going to reallocate those funds in terms of PPEs for education or the social development department, or in other departments that will require PPEs or assistance. I think there was a question on community development. If it is required, I can provide the member with the objectives and the priorities of that grant in specific. Then there was also something about the how we can monitor the impact of the spending of the COVID-19 funds. At this stage, it's very difficult. We won't be able to monitor it because there was no indication of any outputs or targets required for the reprioritization. The National Treasury also indicated that the business plans needs to be updated, and those business plans have not been updated up to now, and those business plans are also not submitted to Parliament, especially not to this committee. So one can inquire about that and actually ask for the updated business plans so that we can monitor the outputs and the targets that has been set for the additional funding or the reprioritized funding. I think I will stop there and give my colleague an opportunity if he wants to come in.
Okay.
Thank you, Nelia. Thank you for the questions, honourable members and co-chairs. I just want to also add some of the points from what Nelia said. I just want to start quickly with the one on control and measures that the legislature could implement and so on. But I think the big issue on some of these issues is around governance measures at the local government. I'm assuming that was where the question came from Honourable Muletsani. I think the effectiveness of the governance structures of the local government, it's important to be looked at. I think also when you also look at the role of provincial government, district, provincial, and also coming up to national government, the role of the governance structures is very important in terms of ensuring that there is consequence management in some of these poor governance structures and so on at the local government, and be able to implement the budget as they were approved and achieve a much needed service delivery in that regard. So important role of governance structures. And I think even AG has also emphasized the importance of governance structures over the years, and we've also raised that that's very important. But of course, one of the simplest way, as Honourable Dipo was saying, is around consequence management. That also questions the role of governance structures, ensuring that consequence measures that are put in place are implemented, and also the results of not recurring of these poor governance measures are realized. And also the issue of lack of follow through. I think one thing that we've raised before, I think in Parliament, was that sometimes there could make a much impact in by just following through. If a report is written down today to say these are the issues that the government is taking into account, when the MTPs come, we need to start with what has been realized from those recommendations made by committee. So I think the follow through for me is a very important aspect, which is I think Parliament has lacked a bit in that regard to ensure that there's follow through on measures that were recommended to government. So very important, but also issue of capacity. I mean, the point I've raised there, it's very, very important issue. Allocating money on its own is not enough, Chair. It's not enough. There need to be clear mechanisms that there is enough capacity to be able to implement these budgets, or both human and institutional capacity. It shouldn't be also be human capacity. That's also one measure that Parliament can use to try to ensure that some of these poor governance measures do not recur over the years. The 20 billion on social relief, we'll look at that on our Peters and revert back. We just want to make sure that we understand the question, because again, we understand where the money has, and we'll revert back to the committee in that regard, because also there's still early days to really determine value for money for some of this relief that have taken place. I also want to comment, on what Nelly was saying, issue of surrendering funds and so on. It's a big issue. I mean, because that's also touched on infrastructure expenditure and so on. Because I'm going to take it out in two folds. Obviously, we borrow money as government to be able to implement the service delivery plans and so on over the years. And certainly, if such money is not used, there has been a cost implication, an opportunity cost there to say, look, we had this money we wanted to use for this social infrastructure measures, and if it's not used up for that, it becomes a problem in that regard for service delivery, but also for economic development in that regard. But I think the second part I want to take on this is precisely that, it also brings back for me the debate around zero-based budgeting, because for me, of course, surrendering and revising budget is part of the budget process. But at the same time, if you do it in a very extended time or without any clear measures, it does question or it attacks the integrity of the budget process, in my view. If we keep on revising overly, it's just questions of what was even the initial budget even credible and so on. So it brings those questions into place. Of course, taking to those measures, but I agree, surrendering and revising report is part of the budget process. But I think there need to be a mechanism whereby you probably have that in a measured, as opposed to being in an open, in a larger scale. And I certainly also welcome the committee, but also before I step out of the issue of surrendering, there's the issue of capacity as well. At be able to spend as government, this money, that should also be part of the question, which for me is very important. When we talk about human capital formation, thereof, it needs to be looked at as a serious issue, because the question now, the debates around treasury, but the bigger issue is the spending departments or spending sectors who needs to answer some of this question. Why haven't they been able to implement the planned spending on infrastructure or on social relief and whatever the case might be there. Another point which I wanted to respond on is on the infrastructure capital. Oh yes, I was saying we welcome the questions around a 2-page on zero-based budgeting, Chair. We will certainly look at that and come back to the committee, try to bring the debate even further from our perspective in this regard. The issue about capital expenditure, Chairperson, we are saying the President, there's a trend that shows that globally capital expenditure or infrastructure expenditure is important for service delivery and also for economic recovery, and also can be used to support government in dealing with some of the COVID-19 response. When you see some of the COVID-19 responses in government, you realize that lack of infrastructure is a big issue as well. So I think the importance there. But the point we're saying is that we've seen the revised budget largely has less to focus much on that, and which, of course, what we're saying is that it raises a bit of concerns. And I think one of the suggestion I was saying was that the Parliament, as part of the recommendation, could also consider that detailed plan in terms of what are some of the immediate plans. I know there's a plan of some of the specific projects that government, on the short term, medium term, long term, but I think that needs to be part of the information that Parliament uses oversight to try and deal with some of the concerns around lack of spending on infrastructure or what have you. And then I think I want to emphasize the point I've raised, that, I mean, the reason why we have not had a lot of, or we've had underspending or lack of investment has largely been lack of clear framework in terms of how infrastructure will be implemented over the years and so on. And I think, there's been some development that's discussed, but also the oversight structures, Chair, oversight structures, there are very multiple oversight structures which ought to oversee that process of government budget implementation. And that also means Parliament can also play a role in really holding the different sectors into account in this regard. I think these are some of the points I've noted, which I would probably come back later if there's any other points. Thank you, Chairperson. Missing the Chairperson? I can't hear. Chairperson, did you hear me? Not sure if I was clear.
Comrade Chair, you are mute, Comrade Chair.
Okay. Did you hear me, Chairperson? I don't know if my points came through. Did they come through?
Madam Maslangu, your mic is on mute.
Thank you. I was speaking to myself. Thank you so much. There's no one from PBO now. PBO is done.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, let's go to COSATU. Thank you for the alert, honorable members.
Okay. No. Thank you, Comrade Chair. Thanks to the members for the questions. I think on most issues, you can see that there's 90% of agreement on most issues, and I think it's because of the challenges facing us, and there has to be a broader spirit of social compact. I must say also, Comrade Chair, that the passing away of Comrade Ronald Mofokeng is an indication that COVID-19 is not just something out there, it's something that's there, it's a reality. We also lost a member of the KZN legislature, Comrade Mtembu, early this week to COVID-19. So this thing is there. It must really concentrate our minds. But I think, Chair, just thanks to the members and thanks to Honourable Ryder for the comments. I think there's nothing wrong with us agreeing. And, as trade unions, we have to be pragmatic. Our members' jobs are on the line. We have to focus constantly on ways to save jobs, to save industries, and it has to be based on economic logic. Slogans won't bring bread home for workers to feed the family, especially in this crisis. I think for us, honourable members, the taxi relief is a unique opportunity. That industry for a very long time has been a lawless industry. We all know it. We know it's got the capacity to create anarchy and chaos. And I think for us, government has to be very blunt. If you want this 1.1 billion rand relief, these are the conditions. You start behaving. You start making sure you are registered for the UF, for COIDA. If you have traffic tickets, if you behave like hooligans, the money must be withdrawn. I think the other issue, Chair, which we've been trying to raise with government, we think government has been too soft on it, is that the economic relief we're pumping into the economy now, it's good, we support it, but it must be conditional upon employers retaining jobs. We can't use public funds to bail out a company only for the employer to go and retrench workers. Worse than a 40% unemployment scenario. But I also think we need to look at more strategically around the incentives the government provides through DTI, etc., to businesses to make sure they're also further strengthened and incentivized for job creation. So you create conditions for employees to create more jobs. I think also to Honourable Ryder around the municipal level issue. Look, we might speak nice English here at Parliament, but Honourable Wright is right. Our members are not happy at a municipal level. You know, we have 29 municipalities which frequently don't pay workers on time, especially in Free State, Northwest, Limpopo. And it's impossible to tell those members to be happy when they see councillors getting paid, but they are not getting paid for months at a time. And of course, now, Chair, when you have 4,500 municipal workers being hit by COVID-19, it's going to make the anger deeper. I think the situation is going to explode if by the end of July, those municipal workers don't receive the salary increases. And there's no amount of alliance politics which is going to manage that issue. You're finding in many workplaces now in the private sector, when workers don't receive the salaries or the UF payments, wildcat strikes are taking place. It's very difficult to manage that, and workers are right to be angry. I think to Honourable Okam, look, it is a bleak picture. It's been bleak for quite a while. That's what has frustrated us as COSATU, that we didn't feel the government was coming with clear plans to grow the economy, to save the state, to save the SOEs, to create jobs. We felt government, even with the supplementary budget, had simply presented a very laissez-faire, business as usual budget, whilst we're having 40% and rising levels of unemployment. There is no mention of job creation targets in the supplementary budget. So for us, we think we're wasting time, which we simply don't have. We hope that this phase 3 of government approach can be unpacked for us, and we can see something meaningful in the MTBPS in October. But we would remain very skeptical. The picture in local government is extremely scary. Most of those municipalities, to be honest, are not sustainable. They are collapsing. The fact that 90% of them can't even do the basic financial management which they're paid to do, it's a crisis. So I don't think we don't want to enter the whole catered deployment issue. I think for us as Honourable PCSA, it's about, look, all parties deploy people, that's fine, but the people must have qualifications. If you're a municipal manager or you're an engineering services manager, you must have the engineering degree, full stop. But I think, Chair, also government is soft. We have the Auditing Amendment Act, which empowers government to start using a heavy stick to deal with offending officials, and no one has been dealt with so far. Our understanding, Chair, of catered deployment, it doesn't include me deploying my wife or my friend so that we can share tenders. You know, corruption is corruption, irrespective of the party issue. The tobacco industry is a difficult one, Chair. I don't know the exact job loss figures there. I mean, the job loss figures flying around are so extreme, it's difficult to know. I don't think in a broader sense we'll have anything less than 1 million job losses at least. Part of the UIF COVID-19 injection to the economy was to try to avoid the job losses we saw in 2008 when he lost 1 million jobs. So the idea was to pump in that money to avoid breaking the relationship between the worker and the employer, to just help save those jobs. But it's difficult, you know, if you go to a restaurant or wherever and there's only one customer there when there used to be 50 customers. And you've seen research now that says that about half of the employees who receive the COVID-19 relief funds from the UIF are likely to retrench about 20% of the workforce when it comes to an end. And it will come to an end in the next few weeks. But on the tobacco issue, I mean, Chair, it's a complicated issue. We've got about 500 tobacco farms in the country. But equally, the tobacco industry has a heavy cost upon the public health system where people are dying of lung cancer. But also we do agree with the critics who say we're losing out on the tax revenue which is due to the state. Smokers are addicted. They are buying cigarettes illegally and they're going to continue buying no matter what. And that's been one of the major issues you have seen in the past before the lockdown, that we were losing about, I think it was a 7 billion rand or so to illicit cigarettes. We know it's a very corrupt industry. There's often people having hands on both sides, the legal and the illegal side. Chair, around the SOEs, I think, look, for us, the SOEs are meant to be capacitating the state, injecting the economy, but right now they are a burden to the state, they are a burden to the economy, and workers are having to subsidize them. We've been crying for a long time that we need to see a clear business model, a restructuring, a turnaround plan to see how can we save them. And we're seeing the consequence of not having these interventions is that many of them are dying or have died. The post office, we don't know if it'll survive. The post office now is saying they want to cut workers' salaries by 25%. SA Express, it's beyond dead. So it's quite worrying, Chair. We're hopeful that the Presidential Council on SOEs, which Labour will have seats on, will come with urgent plans to save the situation. It will mean we'll have to consolidate, restructure, find new business models, etc. We think we have to prioritize the key ones, Eskom, Transnet, Metrorail. That is also what informed us to intervene in Eskom last year, to try to see what as Labour can we put on the table to save these critical SOEs, because our members' jobs are on the line. But we think, Chair, it's quite alarming that many of the SOEs are now retrenching workers in the thousands. And often at times, the line function departments are silent. They're not speaking out on this issue. And workers are going to say, but it's our ANC government which is retrenching workers, and the different ministers are keeping quiet. We know times is not easy, but it's a crisis, Chair. Let me leave it at that. Honourable Kaiso, look, the wage bill, the public service wage bill now is at arbitration. We are hoping that there will be solutions soon. But members are angry. They feel that nurses are being decimated by COVID-19, and now you're not giving the nurse the simple little increase just to protect their wage from inflation. It's a difficult thing. It's difficult to convince a nurse that she's paid too much when the minister who's saying that makes 12 times what she makes. It's very difficult to convince them. We're very worried that the Salgo unilateral withdrawal proposal by Treasury is going to provoke wildcat strikes, and members are angry. We think it would be more constructive if government came to workers timelessly, not 5 minutes to midnight when the wage agreement is meant to come into effect. Timelessly say, guys, how can we find a win-win solution? Even if we look at the next 3-year agreement or even have a 5-year agreement. But those 3-year agreements, Chair, were meant to be done to give fiscal space to Treasury to budget and to plan. And they were actually quite low compared to previous agreements. Chair, but do you think there is space to find each other? Inflation has plummeted by half. But if government wants to set a compromise of wage bills, we need to see what ministers earn, what municipal managers earn, having significant cuts. Otherwise, workers won't be convinced. Chair, on the state of readiness, at schools, we just simply think government is not ready. The fact that hundreds of schools still don't have decent sanitation, it shows you they don't have toilets, they don't have water tanks. We should be employing more teachers, especially in townships where the learner-teacher ratio has been increasing over the recent years. Chair, just also to Honourable Kaiso around the taxis, we've actually met with the Minister of Transport twice. We're meeting with him again today to see if we can find a solution. We have met with Santako and the Taxi Driver Association frequently, but Honourable Kaiso is right. If you want the money, you must behave. This era of hooliganism in the industry must come to an end. I think to Honourable Peters, and maybe to Honourable Dikhali, just remember that Honourable Peters is from the Northern Cape, but she studied and became active in SAICO in Limpopo. So she's an embodiment of that interprovincial alliance. We have been engaging Honourable Peters with the different ministers. We thought COVID-19 might give us some time to reflect a little bit, but we've been having meetings 5 times a day with the different ministers, including Treasury and DTI on the local procurement, including the PPEs. We've had numerous engagements with them, including with the Minister of Education, Minister of Transport, Labour and Health. And those have been quite helpful to try to unblock many issues. We've set up a task team with DTI, with business and Labour to make sure that we can drive local procurement for the PPEs, and that's beginning to show fruit. But the weakest link there, Comrade Chair, is that the provincial governments really are often at times simply ungovernable. They are not interested in local procurement, and you can see the element of corruption coming into effect. It costs about 15 Rand to produce a cloth mask. But because Treasury said you can sell it for 25 Rand, or they'll buy it for 25 Rand, you're finding many opportunists now racking up the prices to make a profit at the expense of public funds when government simply doesn't have the funds. So these are the kind of difficulties we're trying to fix. Comrade Peters, one of the worrying things about the supplementary budget is that there's R1 billion which has been cut from the Department of Energy's electrification program. And we think that's going to have a heavy impact upon rural areas. And then Honourable Peters, we wouldn't support workers taking voluntary severance packages. We think the point is to create new jobs, not to shuffle jobs from older people to younger people. Older workers have got grandchildren, they've got children they support, and you'll lose valuable skills. We are quite worried about the huge infection rate amongst refuge collection workers, Chair, and the fact that municipalities, even here in Cape Town, are not protecting those workers sufficiently. We do agree, Comrade Peters, about the need for paying for services, and part of our ESCOM proposal is that we must all move to a pay-as-you-go approach. You can't have half the nation paying as you go, and the other half, especially municipalities and provincial departments, pay whenever they feel like it, months later. But we do think that government needs to honor the ANC commitment about providing increased subsidies for indigent households for electricity and water. And that was part of the VAT relief agreement agreed to by the previous administration. But we do need to see, Comrade Chair, a sustainable funding model for municipalities, because many of them depend upon electricity tariffs. And that might mean we must fast track the district model approach, because these 257 municipalities are simply not sustainable. Prince Albert or Beaufort West are just too small to sustain a municipality, for example. I think to Honorable Karim, the 350 grant given out to long-term unemployed, it's shocking that most of that has not been dispersed yet. We would support having the discussion on the BIG, and I think even the Minister of Finance made positive comments in that regard. I think with regards to revenue, and Honorable Karim is 100% right. It's always easy to chant slogans and make demands. We think the ways to increase revenue is on a couple fold. One is to further capacitate SARS, to look at some wealth taxes for those earning above 1.5 million or solidarity tax, to crack down on customs evasions. And it's still shocking that only 5% of custom duties are enforced at the ports. We've agreed with the international funding model for now, financing interventions. But the fact is, Chair, if we don't manage the corruption wasteful expenditure, doesn't matter how much we tinker around the tax revenue. If you bleed 10%, then we're not plugging the holes. We do support reprioritization. We really need to, Chair, though, as a longer term solution to fast track impact investments. Government on its own will never have enough money to drive the infrastructure program. It does mean, Chair, that the PIC and the DFIs must have a much more aggressive buy local investment program, especially linked to job creation. We think there is sufficient funds available in the CETAs which should be tapped into. And with the UF, Chair, the UF commitment for the COVID-19 was 40 billion Rand. We've pushed the UF to increase that to about 53 billion Rand, and we're still pushing them further around further injections into the economy, because we must really throw every single thing we have at this crisis. But look, Chair, I think we'll be happy to engage with Treasury. We think Treasury on its own can't manage it. We should all contribute. So we're happy to engage with Treasury at Parliament or NEDLAC 24/7 to see how can we assist each other. And where we are wrong, we're happy to admit it. To Honorable Dekhale, just coming towards the end, Comrade Chair, look, SATU and the other teachers union have been engaging with the Minister and the Department of Education on a daily basis. But I think the Department of Education must also accept management responsibility. It's amazing that all 5 teachers unions are on one page with the school governing bodies, but the Department of Education really lacks a serious management capacity. And there needs to be some political accountability to it. I think Honorable Joseph, yeah, look, I mean, you're right. It is critical to have hope and to look at solutions. And we would agree with you 100%. I'm going to get into trouble with Honorable Karim for agreeing with a member from the DA, or the DA agreeing to COSATU. But we are very worried that we're going to be collapsing collective bargaining and the trust in government when government runs away from wage agreements. It makes it very difficult to sell compromises to our members. And it's fine if COSATU can agree to something, but members, we have to bring them with us. And it's not easy when members feel angry, they feel that they're being thrown under the bus. And I think what makes it difficult is that when Treasury at the PSCBC and now recently at SALGA says they want to withdraw, they don't come with alternatives. They just say, basically, we'll give you 0%, which means a 5% salary cut to those workers. And at the same time, workers ask, so what are you doing about corruption and wasteful expenditure? Why must a worker in OR Tambo district take a salary cut in effect when they just chowed 6 million Rand on bogus door-to-door in OR Tambo district? And there's no consequence for the municipal management or the leadership there. It is going to make it difficult to get workers to still risk their lives, and if you tell them there's no increase. Honorable Njadu, we would agree with you 100%. A social compact between government, business, labor, parliament is the only way to resolve a crisis, and in particular for parliament to play a very harsh role on government failures. I think the same thing to comment Honorable MPC. And the urgency is there now. We can see things are collapsing. The state in various elements is collapsing. The private sector, many industries is hanging by a thread. So we simply don't have the luxury of time. I think Honorable Buthelezi. Look, I think to be fair to the UF was never built for a shutdown of the economy, Comrade Chairperson. Before the lockdown, they were doing on average about 70 million rand worth of payments every single day. That is now about 700 million rand payments they're doing every single day. So it's a huge increase. So far, about 29 billion rand of COVID-19 and another 3 billion rand of normal UF payments has been dispersed for April and May to over 4 million workers. And that's a massive injection. That's almost a third of the UF's funds. We'll likely hit about 53 billion rand by the end of the June payments. I think, Chair, and there are huge, huge problems at UF. There's still about 950,000 applications which haven't been dealt with for a variety of reasons. There are very scary reports about corruption seeping in. When the UF does the payments, they go and cross-reference those bank account details with the banks, and the banks have been flagging numerous bogus accounts. So you are seeing elements of corruption. It's going to be a hell of a task when the auditors have to go through those payments, and they're going to find significant elements of corruption. We've received countless complaints from workers who haven't been paid. Yet when we checked on the system, because you can check on the system using an ID number, you will see the UF actually paid that employer a month ago. We have had cases where employers lend money to those workers. So there's huge problems. You know, we really have a problem with corruption as a nation, Chair, across the board. But look, I think we have to keep pushing. We are pushing, Comrade Chair, on the UF to see what additional support can they give beyond June to those who are over 60 who can't work, with those with comorbidities, and those workers from sectors which are not allowed to reopen under current directions. It is a challenge, Chair. I think, Comrade Chair, the other issues you raised about how can we retain jobs? I think one of the issues we think right now, Chair, is that we haven't given sufficient sectoral support for heavily battered sectors of the economy, in particular retail, restaurants, hospitality, entertainment. The Department of Tourism and the Department of Small Business Development each have given less than 200 million rand to those sectors, and that's a drop in the ocean compared to the hundreds of billions we are bleeding. We do think, Comrade Chair, that all the relief given to employers must be conditional upon job retention and creation. Chair, it is really shocking that 200 billion rand that government is sending surety to the banks, less than 10 billion rand has been dispersed so far. We met with BASA, the Banking Association, I think on Monday or Tuesday this week. We don't think business is taking this crisis, or the banks are taking this crisis seriously. Let me put it on the banks, because they're the ones who are blocking this thing. The conditions they're putting for employers to receive this funding are far too strict. They are too onerous, and there's no glory in having 190 billion rand unspent when the economy is on its knees. But also, Chair, it's worrying on 2 points that what BASA told us that only 100 billion rand has been signed surety so far by government, not the 200 billion rand. And then also, government's not moving with speed to push the banks to fast track this relief into the economy. We should be throwing everything we have into the economy as fast as possible. I think the other issues we will see, Chair, as being critical for the economy is sorting at Eskom. We think the new CEO is doing some initial good work, but the challenges are huge. We will be signing the Eskom Social Compact in the next few weeks in NEDLAC, which I hope will help to give it impetus. But I think, Chair, for us as critical is local procurement, both in the public, the private sector, and consumers. So we hope that honourable members, when they go to the shops, they don't buy made in China clothes, but they buy made in South Africa clothes. We think government needs to fast track the other regulatory reforms like water licensing, the digital economy, and so forth. But also, Chair, I think for us the biggest crisis of the supplementary budget was there was not a stimulus plan. And that for us is the major crisis. We have to have a stimulus plan. And it's not just us as COSATU who are saying it, Chair. Most economists and even the president have been calling for it. I think just want to check if I missed anything from yourself, Comrade Chair. Yeah, I think that is the initial thing, Chair. So we have a lot of work, I think, in conclusion, Chair. From COSATU side, we're willing to engage, whether it's at NEDLAC, whether it's in the Alliance, whether it's at Parliament 24/7. And we'll be constantly engaging our affiliates and our provincial structure to see, as you pick up issues on the ground, that we feed it into honourable members for the provincial constituency work or for the committee's oversight work. But let me stop there, Chair. I hope I answered members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 8 minutes left. I'll use those minutes to check to the members if they still want to make some follow-ups. Members, do you want to, anyone who wants to make a follow-up on both the responses?
Chairperson is Buthelezi. It's not a follow-up. It's the questions which I don't think Comrade Matthew responded to them. Just to remind him, if I may.
Okay. Okay.
Comrade Matthew, about UIF, I said there are reports that there are companies who claim UIF on behalf of their workers, and that money doesn't reach the intended beneficiaries. I was saying, what are we doing about that? Do you know about that? And what should happen to those employers? Because as far as I'm concerned, they're defrauding the workers at a very, very difficult time. That's one. Two, companies have been given some tax reliefs and so on. Do you think that the conditions which are being attached to those, for instance, tax reliefs, the bailouts and so on, have you really spent some time on that? As exactly when we do that, what are we getting in return, especially around the question of retrenchments? And then there's this question about SALGA. I said we engaged yesterday, and there are a lot of issues which are coming from SALGA, and some have been raised by your good self. Do you engage with SALGA, and what has come out of that? I'm not coming up with new questions, the questions that I had asked. And lastly, I said the solution to our problems, it's economic growth. My hypothesis from where I am is that other levels of government, especially local government, they see the question of reignition of the economy as the sole mandate of national government. Do you think that enough is happening at that level, and what should be done to try and make sure that they also become part of that exercise? So those were the questions that I asked Honorable Chair, which I still want to hear Matthews talking to them.
Okay. Any other member who wants to make a follow-up to both the PBO and the COSATU? They have not finished allocation. Who is that?
It's Dennis, Chairperson, if I may.
Okay. Dennis
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm and get it expressly stated. Is it legal for Treasury to allocate or to adjust a budget in an adjustment budget process when they've already given a budget amount out and an entity has spent more than their budget? Is it legal for Treasury to now reduce their budget, thus putting them out of compliance? So that Nelson Mandela Bay issue, Treasury has put them out of compliance. Is this a legal act by Treasury? I want PBO to give us a specific opinion on that, please.
Honorable Chair.
Who's that, Faiso?
Yes. Yes, Honorable Chair. I just want to make a follow-up from PBO. She talked about M&E and zero budgeting, but I didn't get her actual recommendation there. Or what's the view of the PBO with regard to that? Because he said monitoring in evaluation and zero budgeting. So I just want to get very clear what is the view of the PBO on with regard to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chairperson.
Chair. Honorable Mletsani. Who's that? Who wants to come? Any other member who wants to come in?
Yes, Chairperson.
Honorable Dipuo.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think the chat system is not working well for registration. Chairperson, I just want to find out from the Parliamentary Budget Office. I'm going back to the response they gave with regard to the the surrendering of funds. Is the surrendering of funds by an entity, a department, or a municipality an indication of lack of planning and the impact thereof on service delivery? Because I would want to believe that the allocation was done based on a need and a plan. And when it is surrendered, it means that that entity and that municipality has failed to plan properly. And because they want to avoid being reflected as underspending, now they quickly send the money back. I don't want people to believe that people have got entities and departments and municipalities have got clean books, when in actual fact, it is the denial of services to the ordinary people, and especially a municipality returning the city of Cape Town, returning funds to treasury. That gee vir my slapelose nagte, man.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Any other member?
Can you please translate that to me? I couldn't understand it.
I'll translate later. Any other member? Okay, we're fine. Let's go to PBO. We all had our pensions. PBO.
Thank you, Chairperson. I also just want to come back. I didn't address the question from Honourable Buthelezi in terms of the impact indicators and the output indicators. So when you look at the impact indicator, if the challenge is basically that people don't have access to housing, and we need to address that. For example, if we have a basis of, for example, only 60% has got access to housing, and we set a target for in the next few years to achieve 80% of people have access to housing, that will be an impact indicator because it addresses directly the challenge in the country in terms of the access to housing. Output indicators that will contribute directly to that impact indicator, for example, will be something like the number of residential units provided or the number of service sites provided. So there's a direct link between the outputs and what we spend on to the impact that it will make, and we will be able to measure it and to monitor the performance. We will have to see the change over time that it has increased. So in terms of the Nelson Mandela Bay, it's not the Treasury that adjusts the budget on Mandela Bay, Nelson Mandela Bay. It's the municipality itself that adjust their budget. It's not the Treasury that makes the changes, because the Treasury can only reprioritize funds or withhold funds that they transfer to the municipality, because the municipality does their own adjustments with their own resources that they allocated in terms of their budget. In terms of the M&E and zero-based budgeting, what we are saying is that not all programs will have to be zero-based. Zero-based budgeting involves a lot of capacity and a lot of work. So monitoring and evaluation can assist government to decide which programs needs to be zero-based. So even monitoring and the evaluation of a program indicates that a program is not performing due to specific components of assessment policy, if you assess the content of a policy, if you assess the context or the capacity. So if it's really, if you find that it's a funding problem, then you can go back to zero-based budgeting. But if it's just a content or context problem after you've done an evaluation, then that can be fixed in terms of the development of plans or quality programs. Honourable Peters, that definitely, if you surrender funds, it will have an influence of services. But in the case of the Western Cape, that indicated that they can reprioritize that funds for the transport grant. Normally, the negotiations with Treasury then will be just to postpone, so it's not a loss or just the funds won't disappear. They might just allocate it in the next financial year when they are ready to implement or spend that money. So it's not that we're just giving the money back, that we're not going to use it. It will be used. It might just be a postponement of using the money. But I totally agree with you. The surrendering of funds has definitely got an influence on service delivery. And it is also because of bad planning. If departments cannot spend. There's a good example of the social development for a few years. They surrendered funds for social grants that hasn't been spent or couldn't be spent. So in that case, it might just have been a problem with the modeling of the funds that they actually require to transfer to SASSA in terms of social grants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Matthew.
Thanks, Comrade Chair. No, thanks to Chairperson Buthelezi. My apologies for not answering the questions in full. I was a little bit feeling intimidated by time pressures. So, yeah, look, I think on the UIF issue, we've increasingly been seeing reports about employers pocketing the money. They started increasing around May. And it is a difficult thing. So part of the UF COVID-19 relief agreement was that because you're now threatened or faced with a possible collapse of the UF systems, because the UF was never built for a total shutdown of the economy. You know, just the fact that they used to pay about 17 million rand every day before the lockdown, and today they're paying about 700 million rand every day shows you the huge pressures. In the first week, the UF hotline collapsed. They get about 70,000 calls every single day. So part of the agreement was that employers will be compelled through a ministerial directive to apply on behalf of their workers. That is to ease the pressures of the UF, to avoid a collapse and to help get the money through. It is also to make it easier because many of the UF application requirements are a little bit bureaucratic and technical. And it's not always easy for a mine worker or a construction worker or domestic worker who doesn't have those access to IT facilities to understand all the bureaucracy. But a consequence of that good intention, Chair, has been that some employers are now charging the money. And we can see it. So some of the interventions that were done to try to address this new unintended crisis was to put on the UF website that workers can check themselves what is their payment status by simply typing in the ID number. And that has helped in many cases to expose corruption and illegal activity. The UF right now is pursuing, with the help of the police, 67 cases of corruption. We think it might be much more. Part of the agreement or the requirement of the UF COVID-19 relief to employers is that they must account within 7 days to the UF, giving proof of payment that I paid Honorable Buthelezi his money, etc. 99% of employers have not done that. And that is we're going to see a huge amount of corruption. It's very worrying. What was then done to the UF is to start shifting payments. Instead of the UF was paying employers who were then paying to workers. That is done partly because there are delays in the UF system, and partly the idea was that the employer should pay the workers upfront and recover that money from the UF, so the workers are not delayed waiting for the money when they need to buy food for the family. So what has been done now is that the UF is increasingly paying workers directly. Even though the employer applies on your behalf, the UF is now paying workers directly. That's come with its own challenges, but it's trying to reduce the scope of corruption, Chairperson. But it's a very serious issue. There's now wildcat strikes taking place in the Free State, the Western Cape, and KZN, especially in the clothing and textile industries. Workers are angry, and it can become violent. If I think that I haven't received my money, but you've received it, it's a very combustible situation. Some employers are taking advantage of those strikes to dismiss those workers. They're using that as an excuse to dismiss people as well. We've asked the UF, and we're meeting with the UF almost twice a day, or at least once a day, to try to address these issues. We've now set up a joint technical committee between the UF, Business for South Africa, and the 3 labor federations to try to address all these issues. And they're huge, huge issues, Chairperson. The fact that we have 951,000 cases, applications which haven't been paid yet, shows you the extent of the crisis. I can't, the UF has done well on a macro level, but there are massive, massive challenges. And one of the challenges now, Chair, is that when we went to the June payments, the UF system kept collapsing. We're now on the 10th of July, and no payments have been done yet for June. So it is huge, huge problems, Chair. Chair, on the issue of the tax relief issues, look, we supported government throwing everything that they possibly could at the economy, including tax relief for employers, from the skills levy, the other contributions, the pay-as-you-earn holidays and deferments, to try to save every single job, every single place of work.
Comrade
But I
Matthew,
think,
we now have time.
okay, so I'll just wrap up quickly, Chairperson. So I think, Chair, just on the tax relief, I think first it was critical, Chair, that there's no conditions being attached. There should be clear job retention and job creation conditions and accountability to government, and also local procurement conditions. Otherwise, you're bailing out somebody who's going to run away afterwards and just pocket the money. Not everybody, but many instances. Chair, on the issue of SALGA, the relationship is not good, if I can be honest. It's been bad for a while. Many municipalities, many local mayors have a very hostile relationship to organized labor. Often it's because trade unions are exposing corruption, are exposing mismanagement, wasteful expenditure. We think that the wage agreement withdrawal, if SALGA agrees to it, can provoke strikes. And it can provoke workers to go on wildcat strikes or to occupy municipal offices, etc. I think the last question, Comrade Chair, to Honorable Buthelezi, what can be done to reignite the economy? We think one is a stimulus plan, is dealing with corruption and wasteful expenditure, is making sure the infrastructure program happens and includes the private sector. It's a buy local campaign. It's sorting out ESCOM and the SOEs. It's the regulatory reforms in the economy, getting the PIC and the DFIs to invest in job creation projects and buy local, etc. It's about impact investment, making sure it happens in the private sector. It's about sector relief for the battered sector of the economy. But also, lastly, Chair, the banks have to play their part. They have to make access to credit affordable and easier. They get the 200 billion rand through to reduce the interest rates more than they've done. And they put job creation at the center of everything, Chair. But let me stop there, Chair, because I know we're under time pressure. But I hope to answer Honorable Buthelez's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, PBO and COSATU. Thank you, honorable members, also members from the provinces. Co-chairperson, thanks very much for driving this meeting while I apologized, and everybody who participated, the staff behind the scenes, thank you so much. I know that we will never have enough time, and it is so interesting to find time and to can engage and debate on issues. And on the closing note, Chairperson, I appreciate what Honorable Weber did, trying to facilitate or mediate what he thought is happening between me and Honorable Ocampo. But it's a good thing, but I still maintain that no to privatization. And I think I heard him well. I have almost 12 months now working with him. But it's good that we are able to engage each other and talk to each other. See you next week. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Honorable Karim, for reminding us our responsibilities, myself and Honorable Buthelezi, to write that letter of condolences to the Mufokeng family, because we've been working with them and the friendship that we have. Thank you so much. Have a blessed weekend. Take care. Stay safe. Thank you so much. The meeting stands adjourned.